The universal appeal of winter solstice. To truly understand the modern American Christmas, the twinkling lights, the feeling of hope, and the gathering around a roaring fire, one must first journey far beyond Bethlehem, past the manger, and back into the deepest history of human experience. The impulse to mark and celebrate this time of year predates the birth of Christ by millennia, rooted in a celestial event that captivated every ancient civilization in the northern hemisphere, the winter solstice. This was not merely the shortest day of the year, it was the cosmic punctuation mark of the year, the hinge upon which existence seemed to turn, the moment when the sun, having retreated to its lowest, weakest point, dramatically paused and reversed its course. For agrarian societies, and indeed all people reliant on sunlight for warmth, food, and survival, the solstice was a terrifying crisis and a profound victory all in one. Life in the ancient world was predicated on cycles. The moon waxed and waned, the tides ebbed and flowed, and the seasons dictated the difference between life and death. When the days grew progressively shorter, when the sun became a pale, fleeting guest in the sky, it fueled a primal, existential dread. Would the sun return? Would the cold and darkness truly vanquish the warmth forever? This fear of cosmic permanence, that the diminishing light might never be restored, was a powerful engine for religious and communal ritual. The winter solstice, typically occurring around December 21st, offered the answer. It was the moment of minimum solar energy, the deepest breath of the year, but crucially, it was followed by the first perceptible evidence that the days were getting longer. This was the rebirth of the sun, a divine confirmation that the Earth's natural rhythm was intact. It was a time when the threat of starvation was imminent, when stored provisions were running low, and when people instinctively gathered for one last great feast before the leanest months of deep winter. They performed rituals of sympathetic magic, striving to coax the fading light back to life, attempting to influence the vast, uncaring cosmos through their own actions. Across vast geographical and cultural boundaries, the recurring theme was the same, celebrating the triumph of light over darkness. Consider the Neolithic architects of Newgrange in Ireland, building an immense passage tomb around 3200 BCE, predating Stonehenge and the pyramids. They engineered the structure so that for just a few minutes around the solstice sunrise, a beam of light penetrates the roof box and illuminates the inner chamber. This was not merely an architectural feat, it was a profound spiritual statement, locking the moment of solar rebirth into stone. Further east, the ancient Persian religion of Mithraism celebrated the birth of the solar deity Mithras, often associated with light and truth, shortly after the solstice. His festival, known as Yalda or Shab-i-Yalda, the night of birth, involved staying awake all night to protect oneself from evil during the longest darkness, celebrating the eventual rise of the sun god. This tradition spread and gained immense popularity, particularly among Roman soldiers, whose beliefs would eventually become a major cultural competitor to early Christianity. Even the simple act of bringing evergreens indoors, a tradition so central to modern Christmas, was an ancient, widespread solstice custom. When the world outside was dead, brown, and frozen, these resilient plants, such as holly, ivy, and pine, served as powerful, living symbols of persistence and hope. They were talismans against the gloom, promising life would return. By surrounding themselves with green life in the dead of winter, ancient people reinforced their belief in spring's inevitable arrival, transforming their homes into refuges of vital energy during the cosmic pause. In essence, the solstice established a calendar date, a mood of hopeful reverence, and a deep cultural yearning for salvation from the cold that remains the spiritual bedrock of Christmas today. It was a time of fear transformed into defiant joy, a necessity that became a feast, and a cosmic event that became the world's most enduring holiday. Rome's rowdy winter festival of reversal. If the winter solstice provided the astronomical necessity for a midwinter festival, the Roman Empire provided the boisterous, chaotic social model. As the burgeoning Christian faith sought to take root in the heart of Western civilization, it was not the quiet solstice ritual it had to contend with, but the 7-day, city-stopping spectacle of Saturnalia. Held in honor of Saturn, the god of wealth, agriculture, and time. The festival originally began on December 17th, but often stretched through the 23rd, dominating the Roman calendar just before the solstice. Saturnalia was by all accounts an explosion of joyful anarchy, a sanctioned, temporary dismantling of the rigid Roman social order. Its central, defining feature was the role reversal between masters and slaves. During the festival, the chains of servitude were metaphorically broken. Slaves were often given time off, allowed to wear the pileus, a cap symbolizing freedom, gamble, and perhaps most strikingly, they were served dinner by their masters. This reversal was a symbolic return to the mythical golden age of Saturn's reign, a time of perfect equality and universal plenty, allowing the steam of social tension to be released in a controlled, festive manner. The air of the city, normally serious and busy, was transformed. Courts were closed, schools were shuttered, and public businesses ceased. The customary Roman toga was abandoned in favor of the synthesis, a casual, brightly colored dinner dress. The greeting of the season was the cheerful, ubiquitous cry of "Io Saturnalia." Feasting and public merrymaking were mandatory, fueling a culture of drunkenness and sexual license that would appall early Christian moralists. Crucially, Saturnalia codified traditions that are instantly recognizable in the modern Christmas. The festival was a prime time for gift-giving. While some gifts were expensive, many were humorous or small tokens: candles, cerae, simple pottery figurines, sigillaria, or playful knickknacks. The giving of candles, often decorated and presented to signify the returning light of the sun, directly connects to the contemporary use of Christmas lights and candles. Furthermore, the selection of a temporary king or lord of misrule, often chosen by lot and given mock authority over the proceedings, served as an ancient precursor to the medieval Fête de Fools, Feast of Fools, and the later holiday revelry that defied social norms.
For the American mind, Saturnalia provided the template for the secular, boisterous, and consumer-driven aspects of the holiday. It was a time of reckless spending, mandatory social calls, and a feeling that the rules of everyday life were temporarily suspended. When Christianity became the dominant faith, it did not eliminate this deeply entrenched, wildly popular festival. It simply provided a new, religiously sanctioned reason to celebrate during the same late December window. The Church recognized the tactical impossibility of eradicating such a vibrant cultural institution, opting instead for a brilliant strategy of absorption and redirection, subtly substituting the worship of the sun god with the celebration of the Son of God. The Roman populace continued to feast and exchange gifts, but the reason for the celebration was slowly, strategically shifted, paving the way for the eventual merger of pagan revelry and sacred observance. Scandinavian and Germanic traditions of the wild hunt and the log. Moving away from the sophisticated urbanism of Rome, a deeper, colder, and more mysterious set of traditions flourished in the forests and frozen lands of northern Europe, the Festival of Yule. Observed by Germanic, Norse, and Anglo-Saxon peoples, Yule was a midwinter observance that emphasized survival, magic, and the active, terrifying forces of nature. Unlike the structured civic joy of Saturnalia, Yule was a more somber, spiritual, and potentially dangerous time, reflecting the harsh reality of winter in these northern climes. Yule was initially a 12-day celebration, a number that survives in the 12 Days of Christmas. It was marked by sacrifices, feasting, and above all, the honoring of the gods and ancestors to ensure the community's protection through the perilous cold. The central figure in Norse mythology during this time was Odin, or Woden, known by the epithet Yulnir, the Yule figure. Odin was the leader of the wild hunt, or Asgård's Rye in Norse tradition, a ghostly procession of the dead and spectral beings that swept across the winter sky, a terrifying supernatural force that needed to be appeased or avoided. This belief infused the Yule season with an aura of heightened spiritual danger, where the veil between the human and supernatural worlds was critically thin. The most enduring direct contribution of Yule to modern Christmas lore is the Yule log. In Germanic and Norse homes, a massive log, often ritually harvested and selected from a specific tree, would be brought into the hearth. It was then set alight and intended to burn continuously for the entire 12 days of the festival. This was a powerful, practical form of sympathic magic. Keeping a perpetual flame alive in the home mirrored and encouraged the sun's return, protecting the household from the encroaching darkness and the chilling supernatural forces of the wild hunt. The log was often decorated with ribbons and sprigs of greenery, and its ashes were sometimes saved and scattered over the fields in the spring to promote fertility. This single tradition survives today in the form of the bûche de Noël, or Yule log cake, and remains a powerful, if subconscious, symbol of defiance against the cold. Another key element was the wassail, a term derived from the Old Norse "veis hael," meaning "be in good health." While this tradition would later evolve in England, its roots lay in the Yule customs of going door to door, offering a shared drink from a communal bowl, often spiced ale or mulled cider, in exchange for food or gifts. This was a vital communal activity designed to reaffirm social bonds during a time of isolation and scarcity. In some traditions, the wassail was performed on the dormant apple trees in the orchards, pouring the spiced drink over the roots to ensure a fruitful harvest the following year, blending the celebration with deep-seated agricultural magic. The imagery associated with Yule is also crucial. The very notion of a powerful, bearded, gift-giving figure traversing the night sky has clear, albeit filtered, antecedents in the legend of Odin. He was often depicted wearing a wide-brimmed hat, riding an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, and bringing gifts or fear during the Yule season. Over centuries, these characteristics, the winter ride, the aerial journey, the connection to gifts, would blend with the Dutch figure of Sinterklaas and the English Father Christmas to ultimately help forge the familiar image of the modern Santa Claus. In summary, where Saturnalia offered the party, Yule provided the mystery and the cozy domesticity of the hearth. The lasting legacy of Yule is the infusion of the holiday with evergreen symbolism, the burning log, and the archetype of the winter gift-bringer. These traditions were carried across the Atlantic by European immigrants, surviving the Puritan ban on Christmas in America, and today form the essential, comforting core of the Anglo-American Christmas experience. Rome's rowdy winter festival of reversal. The celestial necessity of the winter solstice provided the when for the modern holiday, but it was the vast, sprawling, and complex machinery of the Roman Empire that provided the essential how. For the nascent Christian faith, the primary cultural obstacle to overcome was not a solemn ritualistic observance, but the magnificent week-long civic explosion known as Saturnalia. This festival, held in honor of Saturn, the ancient Roman god of seed, agriculture, and time, was not a quiet prayer, but a loud, unbridled party, a sanctioned annual period of chaos that utterly redefined what it meant to celebrate the midwinter. The foundational mythological basis of Saturnalia was deeply significant. Romans believed that during Saturn's reign on Earth, before the rule of Jupiter, humanity experienced a golden age, a primordial time of perfect equality, universal peace, and abundance, where the earth produced crops without toil, and wealth was shared. Saturnalia was an attempt to symbolically resurrect this lost utopia for a single week each December, a brief, joyous return to innocence and parity. This foundational belief translated directly into the festival's most striking and defining feature, the reversal of the social order. For 7 days, beginning officially on December 17th, the deeply rigid hierarchical structure of Roman society was not merely relaxed, it was turned completely upside down. The most visible sign of this upheaval was the treatment of the enslaved population. During Saturnalia, the chains of servitude were metaphorically and sometimes literally broken. Slaves were given a temporary respite from their labors, allowed to wear the pileus, a felt cap symbolizing freedom, and even permitted to wear the casual, brightly colored synthesis favored by their masters. The zenith of this reversal came during the Great Feast. In a sight that would have been unimaginable at any other time of the year, slaves were seated at the dining table and their masters waited upon them, fetching dishes, pouring wine, and ensuring their comfort. This deliberate, ritualized act of humility and equality was a powerful psychological release. It acted as a social safety valve, allowing the immense pressure of Roman class distinction to vent in a controlled, festive manner, ensuring that the existing order, once temporarily suspended, would be all the more firmly accepted upon the festival's conclusion. The spirit of Saturnalia spilled far beyond the domestic dining room and into the public sphere, transforming Rome itself. The customary Roman toga, a symbol of civic seriousness and public duty, was abandoned for the week in favor of the colorful, informal synthesis. Courts were closed, public business was suspended, and most strikingly, schools were shuttered. The entire city paused its serious affairs to indulge in widespread raucous celebration. The solemn greeting of the season, shouted from every corner and tavern, was the cheerful, ubiquitous cry of Io Saturnalia. A pervasive atmosphere of license took hold. Gambling with dice, normally forbidden or restricted, was permitted and actively encouraged. Public and private feasting became excessive, fueled by liberal amounts of wine, which often led to drunkenness and sexual promiscuity, a reality that early Christian writers would later highlight with condemnation. The festival was essentially a week-long government-sanctioned carnival where the rule was simple: don't take life too seriously. Crucially, Saturnalia codified the elements of gift-giving that are instantly recognizable in the modern Christmas. The festival was the season of sigiliaria, small gifts named after the pottery figurines that were often exchanged. However, the most symbolic and enduring gifts were the cerae, wax candles. These candles were presented to friends and family, serving as a powerful non-religious symbol of the returning light of the sun following the solstice. The act of lighting these cerae in the darkness served as a physical ritual of hope, mirroring the deep cultural need to defy the winter's gloom. This custom provides a direct and unbroken lineage to the contemporary practice of decorating homes with electric lights, lighting Advent candles, and enjoying the warm glow of the modern holiday season.
Furthermore, a popular tradition involved the election of a temporary Saturnalius princeps, or ruler of Saturnalia. This individual, often chosen by lots or by finding a coin in a cake, was the ceremonial lord of misrule. He was given mock authority to command ridiculous acts from the guests, such as singing, jumping in cold water, or making humorous observations about the other revelers.
This figure and his mischievous reign are direct ancestors of the medieval Lord of Misrule and later European traditions that emphasize playful chaos and the inversion of authority during the Christmas period. As the Roman Empire matured, its culture became a vast sponge, absorbing deities and customs from its conquered territories. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Saturnalia shared the midwinter calendar with another powerful solar cult, Mithraism. This Persian mystery religion, hugely popular among Roman soldiers and merchants, centered on the god Mithras, an unconquered hero often associated with the sun. Under the Emperor Aurelian, the Roman state officially instituted the holiday of the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun, on December 25th. This holiday was established to honor the Syrian sun god Sol Invictus, but its timing was brilliantly strategic. It fell on the astronomical date of the winter solstice, according to the old Julian calendar, and it provided a unifying pan-imperial solar holiday that appealed to followers of Mithras, Sol Invictus, and other sun-worshipping deities. The significance of this December 25th date cannot be overstated. It was a formal, state-recognized celebration of light's victory over darkness, a day devoted to a nativity, a birth, that was not the birth of Jesus, but the birth of the sun god. When early Christians sought to establish a fixed date for the nativity of Jesus, a date which the Bible does not specify, they were faced with a dilemma. They could choose a date free of pagan connotations, or they could choose a date that was already deeply ingrained in the public consciousness as a time of rebirth and celebration. The early church, recognizing the tactical impossibility of eradicating such a vibrant, pervasive cultural institution, opted for a brilliant strategy of absorption and redirection. By co-opting December 25th, they were not inventing a new holiday, but providing a new, theologically superior reason to celebrate an already mandatory one. The new message was simple yet profound. If the pagan world celebrated the birth of the physical sun, Christians would celebrate the birth of the Son of Righteousness, as prophesied in Malachi 4 verse 2, Jesus Christ, the true light of the world. The triumph of Christianity over the Roman Empire meant the eventual decline of Saturnalia as a named festival. However, its spirit was immortal. The Church successfully replaced the name and the deity, but it fundamentally failed to extinguish the customs. The Roman populace continued to feast and exchange gifts. They continued to ignore the rules and engage in merrymaking. They simply began doing it in the name of the Christian Lord. This Roman legacy provides the American Christmas with its most secular and often criticized characteristics: the spirit of hedonism and consumerism, the need for a social pressure valve, the office Christmas party, the universal gift-giving mandate, and the general air of festive excess all stem not from the quiet Judean hills, but from the rowdy, chaotic streets of ancient Rome. Saturnalia taught the Western world that midwinter is a time for feasting, for generosity, for ignoring class distinctions, and for the necessary, joyful inversion of the mundane world. It is the very engine of the contemporary Christmas that allows the holiday to transcend religious boundaries, because at its heart, the Saturnalian impulse is a human one, a desperate, beautiful need to cast aside our daily burdens and celebrate the unvanquished light of hope. The modern shopper rushing for a last-minute gift, the reveler at a company party, and the family enjoying a rich communal meal are, in spirit, all heirs to the 7-day chaos of the Roman Saturnalian. Scandinavian and Germanic traditions of the wild hunt and the log. While Rome offered the civilized, structured, and rowdy atmosphere of Saturnalia, the template for the public, commercial, and often secular celebration, the true spiritual and magical heart of midwinter devotion lay further north. In the deep, dark forests of Scandinavia and Germania, where the cold was sharper, the night was longer, and the wilderness pressed closer against the settlements, The traditions were rooted in survival, mystery, and a profound respect for the active, terrifying forces of nature. This was the world of Yule, a festival that infused the nascent Christmas with its essential elements of fire, evergreens, and the very archetype of the winter gift-bringer. Unlike the variable timing of Saturnalia, Yule, or Jol in Old Norse, or Giol in Old English, was firmly tied to the solstice and often stretched over a period known as the 12 Nights of Yule. In the north, this period was marked by more than just cold. It was perceived as a time when the cosmic order was vulnerable, when the boundary between the living and the dead, the human and the spiritual, was dangerously thin. The celebration was not merely a feast, it was a necessary ritual of purification, protection, and prophecy to ensure the community made it safely through the Mother's Night, or Modrenecht in Anglo-Saxon traditions, marking the start of the solstice, and the subsequent dark months. The Feast of Yule was intrinsically linked to agricultural and social cycles. It was the time for the annual Yule sacrifice, or Jólablót, where animals were slaughtered not only to honor the gods, but also to provide the massive quantities of meat needed for feasting during the 12 nights. The blood, or hlaut, was used to hallow the people and places, and the subsequent Yule feast was one of mandatory social communion, where vows, or haiti, were sworn over a ceremonial cup, or mini, and healths were drunk to the gods, the ancestors, and the success of the coming season. This emphasis on gathering, ritual pledges, and communal drinking laid the groundwork for the later European traditions of caroling, wassailing, and the solemnity of New Year's resolutions. The most unsettling and influential mythological element of Yule was the wild hunt, or Asgardþrey in Norse tradition, or Vildajagd in German. The leader of this spectral procession was often Odin, or the Germanic Woden, the All-Father, known in his winter aspect as Jolnir, the Yule One. This was not the wise, one-eyed ruler of Asgard, but a terrifying, often malevolent figure who rode across the midnight sky on his 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, leading a ghostly host of the recently departed mythological creatures and dogs. The wild hunt was a harbinger of ill omen, a loud, terrifying noise heard just above the treetops, symbolizing the chaotic energy of winter and the dangerous power of the dead. People stayed indoors, barring doors and windows, and left offerings for Odin and his riders, often a sheath of grain for the horse or a piece of meat for the hounds, to ensure the hunt passed their farm by. This fear of the spectral passing was a profound psychological force throughout the Yule period, enforcing a powerful, internalized reverence for the season's magic. Crucially, the image of Odin as the Yule figure, a powerful, bearded man who traverses the night sky during the deepest winter, often bringing both fear and unexpected gifts, is a clear and traceable ancestor of the modern Santa Claus. As Germanic and Norse traditions blended with European folklore, the terrifying rider of the wild hunt was gradually domesticated, evolving into a benevolent earthbound figure. His journey, however, remained an aerial nighttime enterprise associated with the midwinter holiday, providing the essential imagery of the sleigh, the rooftop, and the magical journey. Perhaps the most potent and direct contribution of Yule to the modern American holiday is the Yule log. This tradition was more than just a practical way to heat a home. It was a central, high-stakes ritual of sympathetic magic and domestic defense.
The log, often a piece of the root or trunk of a large tree, was ritually selected and brought into the home with great fanfare. It was decorated, often with sprigs of holly, pine, or ivy, and set alight with the remains of the previous year's log, creating a direct, continuous link between the past and the hoped-for future. The core demand of the ritual was that the log must burn continuously for the entire 12 nights of Yule. If the fire went out, it was taken as a grave omen for the household's fortunes in the coming year, predicting poor harvests, bad luck, or even death. The burning of the log was a powerful, symbolic act of will against the dying sun. By keeping a perpetual flame alive in the home, the family was, in effect, performing a concentrated act of solar encouragement, coaxing the celestial fire back to its full strength. The log was believed to protect the household from Odin's wild hunt and other supernatural dangers that stalked the darkest nights. When the Yule log finally burned out, the ashes were not merely discarded, they were revered. In some traditions, they were saved and scattered over the fields in the spring to promote fertility and ensure a good harvest. In others, they were kept under the bed to ward off sickness or used to protect the home from lightning. This custom, though often replaced by the purely aesthetic Yule log cake, bûche de Noël, in modern celebrations, is the ancestor of the cozy domestic focus of the contemporary holiday. It established the hearth as the spiritual center of the winter celebration, a place of warmth, family safety, and defiant light. Like all solstice celebrations, Yule placed great emphasis on greenery, but with a particularly powerful, magical intent. In the deep snows of the north, where life seemed to withdraw entirely, the evergreens, the pine, fir, spruce, holly, and mistletoe were not just decorative, they were living proof of life's persistence. They symbolized the unwavering vitality of nature, even in its most challenging state. Bringing evergreens indoors was an act of deliberate magic, inviting life, fertility, and protection into the home. Holly, with its sharp leaves, was thought to ward off evil spirits, while the red berries symbolized bloodline and the returning sun. Mistletoe, a sacred plant for the ancient Druids and Northern European peoples, was particularly revered for its ability to bear fruit in the winter, making it a powerful symbol of fertility and peace. The tradition of hanging mistletoe and the associated kiss is a direct descendant of Yule-era customs, where temporary truces were called and old grudges forgotten beneath the magical bough. This focus on the green, living symbols of winter is the foundational root of the Christmas tree, while the specific tradition of bringing a decorated tree indoors gained widespread popularity much later through German traditions in the 16th century. The spiritual impulse, the need to use evergreens to brighten the home and defy the gloom, is firmly established in the rituals of Yule. It is the Norseman's plea for life, visually rendered, that still graces American living rooms today. The final enduring legacy of Yule is the communal tradition of wassail. The term itself is derived from the Old Norse vis hael and the Old English washael, meaning be well or good health. While the ritual evolved in Middle England into caroling and drinking from a communal bowl, its origins lie in the Yule necessity of sharing warmth and goodwill. During the Yule feast, the wassail bowl, a communal cup filled with spiced ale, wine, or mulled cider, was passed around the table, often with a solemn pledge or toast. This act was vital. In the isolated, perilous world of winter, the sharing of the cup and the declaration of good health served to reaffirm the bonds of the community, ensuring that everyone entered the lean months with renewed commitment to mutual survival. Later, the practice evolved into people going wassailing, traveling from door to door, singing songs, proto-carols, and offering a drink from their bowl in exchange for food, gifts, or money. This ancient exchange of warmth and charity laid the basis for the modern traditions of Christmas caroling, holiday generosity, and neighborly visits. In essence, Yule provided the North American Christmas with its cozy domesticity, its central imagery of the fireplace and the forest, its core figure of the bearded winter traveler, and its deep, intuitive connection to fire and evergreens. Where Rome gave the holiday its noisy public framework, Yule gave it its spiritual depth, its magic, and the quiet, comforting rituals that protect the home from the cold darkness outside. The practices of Saturnalia and Yule, though vastly different in tone and geography, were merely the most impactful Northern European expressions of a universal human impulse. Across continents, in cultures that never interacted, the darkest days of the year triggered an identical primal response, the need to perform rituals that acknowledged the darkness, affirmed hope, and celebrated the inevitable retreat of the darkness and the return of the sun. The history of Christmas, therefore, is not a history of one religion's growth, but a profound tapestry woven from global customs, all celebrating the same cosmic truth, that light always follows the night. This final sweeping survey of ancient midwinter observances reveals the deep, persistent root structure that made the later Christian holiday instantly recognizable and universally appealing. One of the most profound and ancient celebrations of light over darkness originated in the Persian Empire, a tradition that predates Zoroastrianism and continues to be honored today, Shab-i-Yalda, the night of birth. This celebration takes place on the longest night of the year, marking the moment when the sun god Mitra, or Mithras, is believed to be born from a rack. Yalda is not characterized by the chaos of Rome or the fear of Yule, but by the quiet, defiant strength of community and scholarship. Families gather for an extended night of feasting, storytelling, and reading poetry, particularly the works of Hafez, as a means of outlasting the oppressive darkness. The core belief is that the final hours of the year's longest night are the most dangerous and ominous, and therefore people must stay awake, wrapped in the warmth of community, to witness the dawn. Special foods are prepared, especially fruits that symbolize the sun and the cycle of life, such as pomegranates, whose red color signifies the dawn, and watermelons, kept from the harvest specifically for this night. The seeds of the pomegranate are symbolic of the many lives and hopes that will flourish in the coming season. By consuming these bright, solar-colored foods, and by maintaining a literal light through lamps and fires, the community performs an act of spiritual maintenance, helping the sun to regain its strength and ensuring the defeat of the evil spirits of the night. Yalda provides a beautiful example of a solstice holiday centered on intellectual and familial light, not just physical warmth, establishing the deep link between knowledge, community, and the season's enduring hope.
Further south, in lands blessed by warmer climates, but still governed by the celestial clock, the pattern of rebirth was equally critical. In ancient Egypt, the sun god Ra was the supreme deity, and the annual cycle was one of death and renewal. While the Egyptians celebrated many festivals, the return of the sun following the solstice was a less dramatic but equally vital confirmation of Ra's eternal victory over the serpent of darkness, Apep. More directly influential to the eventual Christian narrative were the Syrian and Anatolian rites of Adonis and Tammuz. These were deities associated with vegetation and harvest, whose death and yearly resurrection mirrored the seasonal cycle. The mourning for the dead god in the winter and the subsequent celebration of his rebirth or return in the spring provided another powerful pre-Christian narrative template for a divine figure's cyclical death and triumphant renewal. These mystery cults, widespread in the Roman Empire, prepared the cultural ground for accepting a story of a savior born to conquer death and darkness. The widespread worship of the Indo-Iranian deity Mithras is central to understanding the placement of Christmas on December 25th. Mithras was the Persian god of light, loyalty, and contracts, whose cult was systematized in Rome into Mithraism, a soldier-centric mystery religion. Worship took place in underground temples, Mithraea, often decorated with the scene of Mithras slaying a bull, Tauroctony, symbolizing the creation of life and the ordering of the cosmos. Mithras was widely believed to have been born from a rock, or Petra Genea, an immaculate, primal birth, on or around the winter solstice. As noted earlier, the Emperor Aurelian formalized this devotion into the state holiday Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birthday of the unconquered sun, on December 25th. This date was a statement of imperial unity, recognizing the power of the sun as a cosmic ruler. The critical takeaway for the history of Christmas is this: when the early church began to consolidate its power and seek a fixed date for the Nativity, they were faced with a pagan world that already observed a massive, celebratory, and state-sanctioned birthday of a divine hero born of a miracle on December 25th. Choosing this date for Jesus was not an arbitrary decision. It was a strategic masterstroke of cultural appropriation. By asserting that their Messiah was the true unconquered Son, the true light of the world, Christian leaders deftly subsumed a popular pagan holiday, immediately giving the Christian nativity feast powerful cultural gravity, and allowing new converts to continue their accustomed celebrations under a new theological banner. Even in East Asia, traditions thousands of miles removed from the Mediterranean, the solstice carried immense significance. The Chinese festival of Dongji, extreme of winter, is one of the most important festivals in the lunar calendar, rooted in the philosophical concept of yin and yang. The winter solstice is seen as the pinnacle of the yin force, the cold, darkness, and female energy. From this lowest point, the yang force, the light, warmth, and male energy, begins to be reborn. Dongji is therefore the celebration of the return of yang and the corresponding increase in light leading toward the renewal of spring. The day is marked by family gatherings, worship of ancestors, and a mandatory feast, particularly involving the eating of tongyuan, sweet rice balls, or special dumplings. The round shape of the rice balls symbolizes harmony and reunion, echoing the solstice theme of renewal and community. Dongji provides final, compelling proof that the midwinter celebration is not merely a regional European phenomenon, but a global human response to cosmic reality. Every culture, regardless of its religious text, recognized the solstice as the crucial pivot point, demanding reverence, feasting, and the deliberate creation of light and warmth to help push back the darkness. The common thread running through Newgrange, Saturnalia, Yalda, and Yule is the sacred fire, be it the solar gleam in the tomb, the exchanged cerise, the continuous burning Yule log, or the home lanterns of Yalda. This deliberate creation of light in the midst of the deepest darkness is the single most enduring psychological impulse that defines the holiday season. When the early Christian missionaries arrived in the pagan communities of Europe, they did not have to teach the locals when to celebrate. They only had to teach them who to celebrate. The pagans were already gathering, feasting, exchanging small gifts, lighting fires, and decorating with evergreens to combat the dread of the long night. By strategically placing the Nativity of Jesus, the proclaimed light of the world, squarely on December 25th, the Church executed the final, masterful move of cultural transition. They affirmed the ancient truth that the light returns, but assigned it a new salvational meaning. The modern American Christmas, with its frenetic shopping, cozy family gatherings, glittering lights, and carols, is the direct composite heir of this ancient global need.
The commercial chaos of Black Friday owes a debt to Saturnalia's license. The smell of pine in the living room comes from Yule's fear of the dark. And the date itself is a monument to the unconquered sun. This powerful, interwoven heritage ensured that when the Christian celebration finally arrived, it wasn't an alien intrusion, but a welcome continuation, a new chapter in humanity's oldest story, the celebration of light conquering the darkness. Why December 25th was chosen, or co-opted. The transition from the ancient world of pagan solstice revelry to the Christian observance of Christmas represents one of history's most profound and strategic cultural transformations. Having explored the deep, universal human impulse to celebrate the return of light in the heart of winter, the central question for the early church became, how do we introduce the Nativity of Christ into a calendar already saturated with feasts of the sun? The Bible famously offers no date for the birth of Jesus. The choice of December 25th was therefore not a matter of historical discovery, but a highly sophisticated, multifaceted strategy, a theological, liturgical, and political maneuver designed to seamlessly integrate the Christian Savior into the existing rhythm of the Roman world. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are entirely silent on the year, season, or day of Jesus' birth. The account in Luke, describing shepherds tending their flocks in the fields, even suggests a spring or fall time frame, as shepherds in the cooler climates of Judea typically brought their sheep under shelter during the coldest winter months. For the first 2 centuries of Christianity, Jesus' resurrection, Easter, was the single most important feast. The idea of celebrating the incarnation, the birth, was secondary, viewed by some early theologians with suspicion, as it focused on Christ's humanity rather than his divinity and ultimate triumph over death. However, as the church expanded, the need for a fixed nativity date became pressing for several key reasons. Firstly, establishing a birth date was vital for defining Jesus' place in the Roman calendar, giving the faith tangible historical anchor points akin to those of pagan heroes. Secondly, arguments needed to be developed to counter the popular Gnostically influenced beliefs that Jesus was not fully human until his baptism, thus elevating the importance of his incarnation from the very start. The first attempts to fix a date for the Nativity were scattered, reflecting the Church's geographical diversity. In the East, particularly Egypt and the Levant, the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th was initially the primary focus. This date commemorated not only the visit of the Magi, but also Jesus' baptism, combining the beginnings of his earthly life and his public ministry into one solemn observance. For a time, it seemed January 6th might become the universal Christian celebration of the Incarnation. One major and enduring theory for the choice of December 25th stems from a complex, non-biblical theological concept known as the calculation hypothesis or computus martialis. This theory was popularized by early Christian writers, most notably Sextus Julius Africanus in the 3rd century.
This hypothesis rests on the ancient Jewish belief that the lives of prophets were perfect and whole, meaning they lived for an exact number of whole years. This led to the theological concept of contemporaneity, the belief that great prophets, and particularly the Messiah, were conceived and died on the same day of the year. Since Jesus was believed to have been crucified on March 25th, based on calculations related to Passover, the logic dictated that the date of his conception must also have been March 25th. If conception occurred on March 25th, then the subsequent birth must naturally follow 9 months later, placing the Nativity on December 25th. This theological symmetry, aligning the most profound moment of Christ's death and the beginning of his life, provided a robust, internally consistent reason for the date, allowing the Church to assert that the date was based on profound sacred logic, not pagan influence. The acceptance of this computus martialis gained ground rapidly in the Western Church, particularly in Rome, giving the Nativity a fixed, theologically grounded date that was independent of the pagan festivals, at least on the surface. While the calculation hypothesis provided a convenient internal theological justification, the overwhelming external influence driving the choice of December 25th was the desire to directly compete with and ultimately absorb the dominant pagan festivals of the season. This strategic move is famously known as the history of religions hypothesis. As detailed previously, the Roman Empire was utterly captivated by solar worship. The feast of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun, on December 25th, was a recent yet powerful state-sponsored holiday instituted by Emperor Aurelian in 274 CE. This official imperial celebration was a fusion point for various solar cults, including the popular Mithraism and the worship of Sol Invictus. This made December 25th one of the most culturally significant and mandatory feasting days on the Roman calendar. The early church recognized the powerful, immediate advantage of adopting this date. Converting the pagan population was far easier if they were not forced to abandon their most beloved annual celebration. Instead, they were offered a simple substitution: keep the date, keep the feasting, keep the joy, but change the object of worship. The Christian rationale for this co-option was rooted in symbolic parallelism. Pagan Romans celebrated the birth of the physical sun, Sol. Christians would celebrate the birth of the spiritual sun, Jesus. Early church fathers embraced this parallelism, utilizing existing solar metaphors to describe Christ. Tertullian, circa 160 to 225 CE, referred to Christ as the Sol Salvitus, the Son of Salvation. Malachi 4:2 was used as a key scriptural justification, referring to the Son of Righteousness who would rise with healing in his wings. The placement of the Nativity near the solstice affirmed Jesus as the one who brings the true light to a world of darkness, fulfilling the ancient human yearning for the light's return. By adopting December 25th, the Church was effectively erecting a Christian monument on pagan foundations. They neutralized the competition by swallowing it whole, providing a familiar and festive framework that allowed the pagan Saturnalian spirit to be baptized and directed toward a new sacred purpose. This co-option was a brilliant, pragmatic act of liturgical engineering that ensured Christmas would not be a niche observance, but a universal, culturally dominant feast. The official adoption of December 25th first took place in Rome around 336 CE, during the reign of Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor. The early Roman Church was eager to establish its authority and differentiate its practices from those of the Eastern churches, which continued to favor January 6th, Epiphany. The Church in Rome, with the power of the imperial capital behind it, championed December 25th. As Rome's influence grew, particularly after the solidification of its theological and political dominance in the West, its liturgical calendar spread. The feast's acceptance moved rapidly through the Latin-speaking world. Milan adopted it soon after Rome, followed by North Africa and Spain. The challenge lay in the East. Churches in Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, which had older traditions and stronger ties to Epiphany, resisted. It took over a century for the Roman practice to fully permeate the Eastern Church. St. John Chrysostom, writing in Antioch around 386 CE, famously argued in favor of the December 25th date, acknowledging the need for unity and asserting that reliable records had recently confirmed the December date. This was a polite theological fiction. The records did not exist, but it was an effective tool for achieving liturgical harmony with the West. By the 5th century, December 25th was largely, though not universally, accepted as the date from the Nativity across the Roman world. The debate over the date of Christmas, whether it was chosen for theological purity or for strategic co-option,
ultimately confirms its powerful, dual identity. It is a holiday rooted in the most sacred Christian narrative, yet its timing and many of its customs are inextricably linked to the celebrations of the Sol Invictus and Saturnalia. This duality is precisely what allowed Christmas to endure and become the global holiday it is today. Had the Church chosen a quiet date in the summer, the Nativity might have remained a solemn, secondary feast. By choosing December 25th, the Church inherited the cultural momentum, the established feasting habits, and the deep pre-Christian emotional resonance of the midwinter solstice. The decision was a profound act of theological syncretism, ensuring that the light of the world arrived on the day the world was already celebrating the return of the light. This fusion was a genius move of cultural evangelism, establishing the foundation for all the feasting, gift-giving, and ritualistic warmth that would define Christmas through the Middle Ages and into the modern era. The date debate, therefore, is not a controversy that undermines the holiday's spiritual meaning, but rather a historical lens that confirms the sheer strategic power and enduring human appeal of the Festival of Light. The early years, how Christians first observed the Nativity. With the strategic establishment of December 25th in the Western calendar, the Church faced its next and arguably most difficult task: defining how this new, fixed feast should be celebrated. For the first 3 centuries of Christianity, the primary focus had been Easter, the celebration of the resurrection. Introducing the Nativity, a celebration of the Incarnation, required a deliberate and sustained effort to elevate its spiritual significance above the raucous, hedonistic clamor of the already entrenched pagan festivals, particularly Saturnalia and the days Natalis Solis Invicti. The early observation of Christmas was therefore a delicate balancing act, solemnity battling revelry, and Christian theology attempting to baptize deep-seated pagan customs. The initial observation of Christmas, particularly in Rome and the major sees, bishoprics, was profoundly liturgical and doctrinal, deliberately countering the secular chaos of the midwinter pagan parties. The Church's first priority was to emphasize the sacred mystery of the Incarnation, the divine act of God becoming human, and to firmly place the feast within the context of Christian doctrine, distancing it from solar worship. The defining characteristic of the observance was the establishment of the Christmas Mass. The earliest records show the practice of celebrating Mass at dawn on December 25th. However, a highly influential custom soon developed, the celebration of 3 separate Masses. One, the Night Mass, Midnight Mass, celebrated at the start of December 25th. This dramatically emphasized the darkness that surrounded the moment of Christ's birth, echoing the ancient solstice theme of light emerging from the deepest night. It established the tradition of the late-night vigil, transforming the pagan urge to stay awake and ward off darkness into a pious act of waiting for the true light. The Dawn Mass focused on the shepherds, emphasizing the humble, rural setting of the Nativity and symbolizing the dawn of the New Covenant. The Day Mass, the principal service, focused on the divinity of Christ, reflecting the theological concept of the Word, Logos, made flesh, often tying back to the Gospel of John's declaration, "In the beginning was the Word." This 3-Mass structure was a powerful tool of catechesis. It forced the community to engage with the Nativity story on multiple levels, moving from the historical event to the profound theological reality. This structure also acted as a symbolic barrier against the surrounding pagan revelry, offering structured, sacred activities during a time when Roman streets were otherwise given over to drunken license. The early Church understood that simply declaring December 25th to be Christ's birthday was insufficient. The day had to be claimed spiritually. The central challenge was the pagan Saturnalian hangover. Though the names of the gods had been changed, the popular culture still expected feasting, gift-giving, gambling, and social upheaval. Church leaders took a dual approach.
Condemnation of excess. Preachers like Saint Gregory of Nazianzus and Saint Augustine of Hippo delivered sermons specifically criticizing Christians who observed the new feast in a pagan fashion. They condemned the feasting and dancing that mirrored Saturnalia and urged converts to celebrate with piety, not luxury. St. John Chrysostom, in his Christmas homilies, sternly reminded his flock that their celebration should involve singing hymns, not indulging in excessive eating and drinking. This internal struggle reveals that the co-option of the date was not instantaneous. The Christian and pagan methods of observance struggled for dominance for centuries. Repurposing of custom. Recognizing that certain customs were too entrenched to ban, the Church began to repurpose them. The giving of gifts, for example, could not be stopped, so it was subtly reframed. Instead of gifts for luck or pleasure, as in Saturnalia, the gifts were now meant to reflect the spirit of the Magi's offerings or to be acts of Christian charity, alms given to the poor and needy. The chaotic Lord of Misrule was replaced by figures like Saint Nicholas, whose feast day was December 6th, a charitable bishop who became an early patron of the season's benevolence. This slow, strategic shift transformed a secular custom into a virtuous Christian activity. Perhaps the single most effective tool the Church developed to make the Nativity real and accessible to the common person was the invention of the nativity scene, or the crib. While the use of physical representations in worship developed over time, the tradition is famously credited to Saint Francis of Assisi in 1223 CE, although its roots are older. St. Francis, aiming to counteract the holiday's growing secularization and abstract doctrine, sought to make the Christmas story tangible. At a small village called Greccio, he obtained permission from the Pope to stage a living representation of the Nativity. He brought in hay, an ox, and an ass, and preached a vivid sermon to the gathered people. This event was revolutionary. 1. Emotional connection. It allowed the faithful to visualize the humility and poverty of Christ's birth, fostering a deep, empathetic, and emotional connection to the Incarnation that verbal sermons alone could not achieve. 2. A focus on the manger. It powerfully shifted the popular focus away from the boisterous feast days and toward the humble, silent moment of Christ's birth. The crib, a symbol of poverty and simplicity, stood in contrast to the extravagance of Roman celebrations. 3. Democratization of faith. The scene was a form of religious education accessible to the illiterate masses, quickly spreading throughout Europe and becoming the definitive visual anchor of the Christmas story. The crib became the central, non-liturgical focus of the observance. The reverence paid to the crib, the precursor to modern nativity displays, was a direct, successful effort to supplant the pagan icons and rituals of the midwinter period with an image of Christian piety. The early church also had to contend with the Eastern tradition of Epiphany on January 6th. The solution was not to eliminate Epiphany, but to integrate it, creating the 12 days of Christmas. This 12-day period, beginning on Christmas Day and concluding on Epiphany, created a unified festive season. For the early church, the 12 days served multiple liturgical and social purposes. 1. Liturgical unity. It allowed the Western Church to acknowledge the importance of Epiphany, which commemorates the Magi's visit, Christ's baptism, and his first miracle at Cana, while maintaining December 25th as the central birth date. 2. Cultural dominance. By extending the Christian celebration for 12 days, it successfully eclipsed the duration of the pagan Saturnalia and Yule, allowing Christian observances to dominate the cultural calendar throughout the entire crucial midwinter period. 3. Feasting window. Crucially, the 12 days provided a sanctioned Christianized window for feasting and communal activity, slowly directing the ancient human need for winter revelry toward the church-approved calendar. The emphasis on Epiphany also gave early Christians a way to manage the pagan New Year's Day, January 1st, which was another day of riotous, often superstitious celebration in Rome.
By focusing attention on the solemnity of Epiphany on January 6th, Church Fathers sought to dilute the influence of the pagan New Year's Day, offering a sacred conclusion to the season. The early observation of Christmas naturally incorporated elements of feasting, reflecting the ancient tradition of slaughtering livestock before the winter scarcity. But the intent was shifted from pagan excess to Christian hospitality and charity. The concept of the agape feast, or love feast, was revived, encouraging wealthy Christians to open their homes and tables to the less fortunate, including servants, widows, and the poor. The food was rich, roast fowl, specialty breads, and wine, but the act of sharing was paramount. This emphasis on almsgiving and generosity transformed the Roman custom of exchanging small, frivolous gifts into a virtuous practice. The Christmas season, therefore, quickly became intertwined with the identity of Saint Nicholas, a 4th-century bishop known for his legendary anonymous gift-giving to the poor. His feast day on December 6th, and the tradition surrounding it, became the first major Christian charitable focus of the season, acting as a preparatory period for the Nativity itself, and providing a sacred model for the act of winter gift-giving that was far removed from Saturnalian license. The early years of observing the Nativity were defined by this persistent, nuanced struggle, establishing profound theological meaning while strategically accommodating and ultimately purifying the popular, powerful, and deeply ingrained human desire for midwinter joy, feasting, and light. The observation of Christmas was born not in a vacuum, but in a chaotic, celebratory pagan world, and its initial forms were a testament to the Church's pragmatic genius in cultural integration. Confronting the heathen. Blending and banning pagan rituals. The establishment of December 25th as the Nativity Feast was a strategic victory for the early Church, yet it was only the beginning of a long, often brutal cultural war. The challenge was not simply when to celebrate, but how. The Christian observation was born into a world saturated with the deep-seated traditions of Saturnalia, Yule, and the Solus Invicti. Feasts defined by chaotic revelry, superstition, and non-Christian worship. The Church's path to making Christmas truly Christian holiday involved a contradictory, pragmatic, and sometimes violent strategy, a careful process of blending, banning, and baptism of pagan rituals designed to simultaneously stamp out heresy and co-opt popular customs. The practice of blending pagan customs into Christian liturgy was formalized through the concept of accommodation or syncretism. Church leaders recognized that outright prohibition was often ineffective, driving practices underground and creating martyrs out of minor revelers. Instead, the approach was to meet the people where they were. The most famous early proponent of this approach was Pope Gregory the Great, c. 540 to 604 CE. In his instructions to the missionary Augustine of Canterbury, not to be confused with Augustine of Hippo, Pope Gregory advised against destroying pagan temples in Britain. Instead, he argued they should be cleansed with holy water, rededicated, and converted into Christian churches. The logic was clear. People are more likely to attend the new religion's services if they are held in locations and at times already sacred to them. This same principle was applied to the calendar. The psychological need to feast in midwinter, to light fires, and to defy the darkness was deemed an enduring human need, not merely a pagan one. By rebranding the evergreen boughs as symbols of eternal Christian life, or transforming the solstice fire into the vigil for the light of the world, the Church successfully provided a Christian container for these primal, powerful human impulses. This baptism of custom was the pragmatic genius that ensured the survival and eventual dominance of the Christian festival. While the Church could blend evergreen boughs and feast days, it had much harder time with the unbridled chaos and superstition that typically dominated the turn of the new year. The calends of January 1st in the late Roman Empire, was marked by intense pagan divination, cross-dressing, wearing animal masks, and widespread drunken violence, all direct remnants of Saturnalian license.
The Church launched an aggressive campaign against these practices, seeing them as direct threats to public order and Christian morality. The councils of the Church, particularly in the 5th and 6th centuries, issued severe condemnations against Christians who engaged in these diabolical excesses. Preachers warned that cross-dressing was a demonic parody, and the wearing of masks turned humans into beasts. Sermons from this era reveal the intensity of the struggle. Saint Caesarius of Arles, d. 542 CE, delivered fiery homilies specifically timed for January 1st, urging Christians to attend church and pray, rather than participate in the shameful and wicked customs of the heathens. The ban was fiercely enforced, not just because the rituals were pagan, but because the accompanying drunkenness, gambling, and violence, often resulting in deaths, directly contradicted the sober piety the Church sought to establish during the Christian season. This selective banning strategy shows the Church distinguishing between harmless symbols, like ivy, and dangerous behaviors, like rioting. The pagan traditions of Northern Europe, particularly Yule, required a different form of confrontation, one focused on mythological replacement. The Yule log and the evergreen were accepted and sanctified, but the terrifying wild hunt and the figure of Odin needed to be neutralized. The pagan image of Odin, or Woden, the aerial, bearded traveler leading a spectral army, was not destroyed, it was systematically domesticated. His role as the bringer of fear was separated from his role as a supernatural winter traveler. His characteristics, the cloak, the beard, the winter journey, were slowly layered onto the much more benevolent, Christian-approved figure of Saint Nicholas, or Sinterklaas, in the Low Countries. The Christian saint, known for his secret acts of charity, became the sanctioned vehicle for the winter gift-giving impulse, effectively channeling the awe associated with Odin into the reverence due to a pious Christian bishop. The Yule log, once a magical tool for coaxing the sun, was subtly rebranded as a symbol of domestic warmth and piety in the face of winter's harshness. While the magic of keeping the fire going was denounced as superstition, the custom of gathering around the hearth for a prolonged period was embraced as a virtue of Christian hospitality and family solidarity. This strategic separation of custom from its original magical intent allowed the practice to survive and thrive. One custom that faced nearly universal ecclesiastical condemnation was the use of mistletoe. In Celtic and Northern cultures, particularly among the Druids, mistletoe was a plant of immense sacred power, revered because it remained green in winter and was believed to possess healing, fertility, and protective properties. The Church viewed mistletoe as a direct threat due to its deep association with pre-Christian, non-Romantic spiritual systems. It was explicitly banned from church altars and decorations. Ironically, this ban may be one reason why the custom survived in the secular sphere. It was pushed out of the churches but remained popular in private homes, maintaining its reputation as a plant of magical significance. The later tradition of kissing beneath the mistletoe is a secular folk custom that emerged much later, but the plant's resilience in the face of the early church's condemnation highlights the difficulty in eradicating deeply rooted folk beliefs. Holly, on the other hand, was allowed to be integrated, its thorny leaves being associated with Christ's crown of thorns and its red berries with his blood, thus transforming a pagan symbol of life into a powerful Christian metaphor. The period between the 4th and 7th centuries was marked by the Church's continuous and necessary vigilance. As Christianity spread, missionaries had to constantly assess which local customs could be Christianized and which had to be exterminated. Feasting and gluttony. The Church largely failed to stamp out the desire for massive midwinter feasts, reflecting the natural human need to celebrate after the harvest and before the lean months. Instead, they placed the feast in the context of charity, asserting that the meaning of the excess was to share it with the poor, not to indulge in gluttony. Wassail and drinking. The ancient customs of communal drinking and ritual health toasting, wassail, were also impossible to ban. They were gradually channeled into the more controlled context of the Christmas carol and the subsequent communal meals, where the shared drink was a symbol of fellowship rather than intoxication.
The caroling tradition itself evolved from groups of revelers demanding food and drink, often singing secular songs, into groups singing sacred hymns, effectively converting a semi-aggressive custom of demanding tribute into an act of charitable celebration. This confrontational yet strategic approach highlights the essential truth about the history of Christmas. It is not a holiday that emerged perfectly formed from doctrine. It is a triumphant fusion, a cultural mosaic whose strength lies in its ability to absorb, redefine, and redeploy the oldest, most powerful human traditions surrounding the darkest time of the year. The battles fought by the early church against the heathen elements ensured that the skeleton of the pagan solstice celebration was preserved, but the soul was claimed for the Christian story. This act of blending and banning was the final, complex process that fully prepared the holiday for its ascent to cultural dominance in the Middle Ages. The spread of the feast, Christmas's journey across the Roman Empire. The decision to fix the Nativity on December 25th in Rome was not the conclusion of the story, but the firing of the starting pistol. Having established the date and begun the complex process of Christianizing pagan rituals, the Church's next great undertaking was the geographical propagation of the feast. As the Roman Empire stretched its political and logistical reach from the shores of Britain to the sands of Egypt, the Christmas observance followed, using the very structures of imperial administration, trade, and communication to establish itself as a universal fixture. The spread of the feast across the empire, a process that spanned over 3 centuries, was not uniform. It was a patchwork of liturgical struggles, cultural adjustments, and strategic alliances that cemented Christmas as the most dominant feast of the Western world. The initial impetus for the spread of the December 25th date emanated directly from Rome, the Caput Mundi, head of the world. The strategic adoption of the date around 336 CE and the triple mass structure were powerful liturgical innovations that the Roman See used to assert its primacy. When Christianity was declared the state religion of the Roman Empire by Emperor Theodosius I in 380 CE, the Roman liturgical calendar gained quasi-official imperial approval. The strength of the Roman Church lay in its organization and its proximity to imperial power. Bishops and clerics traveling from Rome carried the liturgical practices, including the specific hymns, readings, and order of services for the Nativity, to their distant sees. This ensured a degree of standardization that helped the feast take root quickly in the western provinces, from North Africa to Hispania. The very network of Roman roads, which efficiently moved legions and merchants, also became the arteries for the spread of Christian doctrine and the Nativity feast.
The Roman celebration became the model precisely because it successfully navigated the pagan environment. When missionaries arrived in a new province, they could point to the celebration in the capital and argue that this was the proper, standardized, and imperial way to celebrate the birth of the Messiah, a powerful argument in the centralized Roman world. The spread of Christmas to the eastern half of the empire, the Byzantine world centered in Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria, was the most challenging chapter of its journey. As previously noted, the East primarily adhered to Epiphany, January 6th, which commemorated Christ's baptism, and sometimes the Nativity and the Magi's visit, all in one day. The Eastern Church possessed an older, more established theological tradition, and many clerics resisted adopting a new feast day that felt suspiciously Roman and too closely aligned with the pagan solus invicti. The turning point was the compelling influence of St. John Chrysostom, c. 347 to 407 CE, the great preacher of Antioch. Around 386 CE, he delivered a powerful homily urging his flock to embrace December 25th. His argument was pragmatic and unifying. He claimed, falsely but effectively, that new records had been discovered in the Roman archives proving the true, historical date of Jesus' birth was indeed December 25th. He argued that accepting the date was an act of Christian unity and piety. The greatest push, however, came from the imperial court in Constantinople. As the capital of the Eastern Empire, when the imperial court formally adopted the Roman December 25th practice, it set a powerful precedent. The feast was established in Constantinople in the late 4th century, and from there it spread through imperial decree and influence across Asia Minor and into the Balkans. The ultimate compromise was the creation of the 12 days of Christmas. The East retained the importance of January 6th, while the West cemented December 25th, resulting in a unified season of celebration that began with the Nativity and concluded with the Epiphany. This liturgical solution allowed the great Christian centers to maintain their distinct traditions while acknowledging the universal importance of the Incarnation season. Beyond the tightly controlled Roman provinces, the feast traveled along the frontiers and into the lands of the barbarians, the Germanic tribes, the Goths, and the Celts. Here, the Christian faith, and with it Christmas, was often propagated not by Roman decree, but by individual missionaries, and crucially, through the conversion of royalty. In Ireland, which was never fully subdued by Rome, the faith spread differently. Missionaries like St. Patrick strategically adapted the celebration of the Nativity to the deep Celtic respect for nature and fire. The Yule tradition of the Yule log was not banned, but was simply rededicated, transforming the magical rite for the sun into a symbol of Christ's light. The Christian emphasis on charity resonated deeply with the Celtic laws of hospitality, allowing the feasting element of Christmas to be easily integrated into the existing social structure. In Germanic lands, the Goths and Vandals, who had adopted an Arian form of Christianity, also brought the feast with them. As these tribes moved, conquering parts of the Western Empire, they did not abolish Christmas, they carried it. Though their theology was heretical to Rome, their practice of celebrating the Nativity on December 25th was uniform, ensuring the date's survival even after the fall of Rome itself. The feast became less a Roman festival and more a universal symbol of the Christian kingdom, regardless of which king or tribe ruled. The journey of Christmas was fundamentally aided by the sophisticated infrastructure of the Roman state, which the Church, often unintentionally, leveraged. 1. Urban centers, civitas. Roman towns and cities were administrative centers, civitas. The earliest churches were established in these places, and the Roman practice of Christmas was first implemented here. From the cities, the celebration slowly radiated out into the rural pagi, hence pagan, a process that took centuries but was initiated by the urban clergy. 2. Trade routes. The extensive Roman trade network, which moved wine, oil, and luxury goods across the Mediterranean and Europe, also moved people, bishops, monks, and pilgrims. These travelers were carriers of religious practice, bringing news and customs from the major Christian centers. The desire for specialized goods for the feast, like exotic spices for mulled wine or special wax for candles, helped cement the holiday into the existing commercial cycles. 3. Imperial messengers. Even after the Western Empire fragmented, the system of imperial communication continued in various forms. Church leaders used these same systems, from horsemen to naval routes, to dispatch synodal decisions and liturgical instructions, including the proper way to observe the Nativity. The vastness of the empire ironically guaranteed the wide-reaching spread of the feast. By the time the Western Roman Empire formally collapsed in 476 CE, the Feast of Christmas on December 25th was already a deeply entrenched observance across Europe and the Mediterranean. It had survived political upheaval, theological schism, and cultural assimilation precisely because it was strategically placed and pragmatically flexible. The spread of Christmas across the Roman Empire was the ultimate testament to the Church's genius in cultural synchronization. It ensured that when the darkness of the Dark Ages descended, the tradition of a midwinter feast, with its message of light, hope, and generosity, was a deeply ingrained constant, ready to provide the cultural and spiritual coherence necessary to bind the fragmented kingdoms of Europe together until the dawn of the Middle Ages. The journey of the feast mirrored the journey of Christianity itself, beginning in obscurity, rising to imperial preference, and finally transcending the empire that first enabled its existence. The 12 days of Christmas, a time of feasting and lords of misrule. As the Roman Empire dissolved and Europe fragmented into localized kingdoms, Christmas shed its purely Roman identity and evolved into the central unifying feature of medieval European society. This era defined the holiday as a paradoxical blend of deep religious solemnity and an expansive, socially sanctioned period of chaos, the 12 days of Christmas. The centerpiece of this period was the Lord of Misrule, a figure who inherited the spirit of Saturnalian anarchy, temporarily inverting the rigid social hierarchy and granting the populace a much-needed release from the Church's stern moral control. The period of the 12 days, commencing on Christmas Day, December 25th, and concluding on Epiphany, January 6th, was a strategic and economic necessity in the medieval world. Strategically, it solidified the Christian calendar's dominance over the entire midwinter season, integrating the Roman nativity date with the older Eastern Epiphany and effectively eclipsing the remnants of Yule and other pagan observances. Economically, the 12 days represented one of the only guaranteed periods of rest in the agricultural calendar. For peasant laborers bound by the relentless cycle of the seasons and a feudal system, this was a rare and treasured respite from the fields. Work, often including the grinding tasks of the mill and the forge, was temporarily halted. This enforced idleness, combined with the abundance of recently slaughtered livestock and stored provisions necessary to survive the leanest months of deep winter, provided the ideal conditions for sustained, mandatory celebration. Feasting was the defining characteristic of the medieval Christmas. The medieval Christmas table was a testament to the community's survival and prosperity. Roast meats, often boar's head, goose, or venison for the nobility, were piled high. Special Christmas pies, rich with spices and dried fruits, the precursor to the mince pie, became ritual foods, symbolizing the wealth and bounty of the harvest. This public display of plenty was a necessary psychological boost against the threat of starvation, transforming the fear of winter into a defiant celebration of life. The most culturally potent element of the medieval Christmas was the institutionalization of the Lord of Misrule, or the Abbot of Unreason in Scotland. This figure was the direct spiritual heir of the Roman Saturnalius princeps. He was chosen randomly, often by a piece of coin or a dried bean baked into a cake, and was crucially almost always selected from the lowest social ranks of the household, university, court, or community. Once crowned, the Lord of Misrule was granted temporary absolute authority over the entire festive period. His function was to command the absurd and the chaotic.
Social grievances could be harmlessly vented through sanctioned mockery and temporary defiance. For the ruling class, it was a tool of social stability. By permitting a brief, controlled period of chaos, the authorities allowed their subjects to purge social tensions, thus reinforcing the rigid order that would snap back into place once the 12 days concluded on Epiphany. The temporary release ensured the permanent acceptance of the status quo. The chaotic spirit of the Lord of Misrule was so pervasive that it infiltrated the most sacred of institutions, the Church itself. This led to the infamous Feast of Fools, Festum Fatuorum, primarily celebrated by the lower-ranking clergy, deacons, subdeacons, and choir boys, predominantly in France. Held around New Year's Day, within the 12 days, the Feast of Fools was a terrifying parody of the liturgical order. Junior clerics would dress up in ridiculous costumes, wear masks, elect a bishop of fools or archbishop of unreason, and preside over services. Their activities were scandalous. Sacred space defiled. They would bring a donkey, the symbolic animal of the feast, into the church and sometimes seat it at the altar. Liturgical parody. They would sing lewd or nonsensical songs instead of hymns and burn old leather or manure as incense. Gambling and feasting. They would gamble on the altar steps and consume rich foods and excessive amounts of wine inside the church building. High church authorities vehemently condemned the Feast of Fools, issuing numerous prohibitions and decrees against its filth and mockery. Yet the custom proved incredibly resilient, thriving well into the 16th century. It represented the ultimate clash between the church's desired solemnity and the powerful, deep-seated folk tradition of midwinter inversion. The Feast of Fools was a stark reminder that even within the most disciplined religious structure, the spirit of Saturnalian anarchy held irresistible appeal. The communal rituals of the 12 days further solidified customs that define the holiday to this day. Wassailing, the Norse tradition of Veshael, evolved into the English custom of wassailing. Groups of villagers would travel from house to house or from castle to manor, carrying a large bowl of wassail, a potent, hot drink of spiced ale, sherry, and roasted apples. They would sing traditional songs, the earliest carols, and demand food, drink, or money in exchange for their blessings and the good cheer they brought. This was often a semi-aggressive custom. If the owners refused, the wassailers might resort to minor mischief. The custom emphasized communal reciprocity, ensuring the wealthy shared their winter bounty during the season of Christ's birth. The Yule log's symbolic reign. The massive Yule log, inherited from Germanic traditions, remained the domestic centerpiece. It was treated with great ceremony, often decorated with ribbons and sprinkled with salt or holy water. Its continuous burning for the full 12 nights was still regarded as a source of good luck and protection, demonstrating how effortlessly the Christian narrative, Christ as the light, merged with the ancient pagan fear of the dark, the log warding off evil. Game and gambling. The new year was celebrated with public games and intense gambling, a continuation of Roman license. The obsession with divination and fortune-telling for the year ahead was so widespread that the church made special efforts to ban these superstitions, though largely without success. The medieval 12 days established the framework for the Merry Christmas that America would later inherit. It was a holiday of excess, theater, and social mobility, however temporary. The deep-seated social need for the Lord of Misrule, for a period where the rigid rules of hierarchy and morality could be safely ignored, is the very reason Christmas survived the fall of empires. This medieval emphasis on feasting and license is precisely what would later draw the bitter condemnation of the radical Protestant reformers in the 16th and 17th centuries. For the reformers, the Lord of Misrule, the boisterous feasts, the gambling, and the drunkenness were not harmless fun, but glaring evidence that the Catholic Church had failed to purify the holy day. They saw the remnants of Saturnalia and Yule, not the birth of Christ. The legacy of the 12 days is that Christmas became inherently and perhaps permanently a feast of contradictions, a moment for the most solemn reflection on the Incarnation, immediately followed by the most riotous celebration of human life and community. This powerful memory of medieval excess would fuel the next great conflict in the history of Christmas, the Puritan ban, and ultimately shape how the holiday was reinvented in the New World. Caroling and wassailing, medieval customs of community and charity. Amid the sanctioned chaos of the Lord of Misrule and the vast feasts of the 12 days, two customs emerged as the defining, yet often complex, acts of public Christmas celebration: caroling and wassailing. These were not merely forms of entertainment. They were intricate social contracts,
essential mechanisms of community survival, and vital expressions of charity during the perilous depth of winter. While rooted in ancient pagan traditions of seeking blessings and warding off evil, they were gradually sanctified by the Church, ultimately embodying the medieval spirit of combining joyful reciprocity with Christian obligation. Understanding these practices is crucial to recognizing how the very sound and rhythm of the Christmas season came to be defined. The modern Christmas carol, typically a sacred song sung in a church or at a doorstep, bears little resemblance to its earliest medieval form. The word carol itself is not religious. It derives from the Old French word carole, which described a circle dance accompanied by singing. These early carols were simple, repetitive songs often sung in procession and performed for secular feasts, harvests, or weddings, not initially for Christmas. The true integration of the carol into the Christmas calendar was a slow process driven by two primary forces: folk tradition and Franciscan piety. 1. Folk tradition, the secular antecedent. As documented in the section on the Lord of Misrule, early midwinter songs were often those sung by rowdy groups of revelers demanding payment for their good cheer. These were not hymns, but often crude, seasonal songs demanding hospitality. This established the custom of the processional song and the expectation of reward for a performance. 2. Franciscan influence, the spiritual refinement. The pivotal moment came with the rise of the Franciscan order in the 13th century. Following the precedent set by St. Francis's nativity scene in Greccio, the Franciscans emphasized the humanity of Christ and sought to make the nativity story accessible to the common people who did not understand Latin liturgical hymns. They began writing simple, joyous songs in the vernacular, local language, that told the Christmas story. These songs, the true ancestors of the modern carol, were easy to learn and encouraged emotional engagement, transforming the rowdy secular carol into a spiritual tool. This fusion created a unique Christian genre, songs that retained the simple, secular, often strophic, stanzas alternating with a chorus, structure of the folk song, but carried a sacred message. This made them ideal for singing not just in the church, but outside the church, in the streets, homes, and taverns, allowing the religious message to spread beyond the liturgical confines. If caroling was the sound of the season, wassailing was the mechanism of social contract and the most direct inheritor of pagan ritual. The term is derived from the Old English greeting, ves hael, or Old Norse ves hael, meaning be well or good health. It was a health-toasting ritual that evolved into two distinct yet interconnected medieval customs. Domestic wassailing. Within the feudal hall or manor, the lord of the house would ceremonially raise a large, ornate wassail bowl, often filled with a potent, hot brew of spiced ale, sherry, and roasted apples, and offer a toast to his family, vassals, and servants, drinking to their health. This act publicly reaffirmed the bonds of the community and the hierarchy, ensuring that the bounty of the house was symbolically shared. Outdoor wassailing, begging for bounty, involved groups, often poor villagers, servants, or children, traveling from house to house, singing, and demanding a share of the household's wassail or other provisions. The song itself, or the simple phrase, wassail, wassail, served as a demand for entry and refreshment. This practice of wassailing for alms was far more complex than simple begging. It was a semi-ritualized exchange rooted in the ancient tradition of demanding tribute during the chaotic midwinter period. It carried a subtle, powerful social implication. The wealthy were morally and socially obligated to share their abundance during the season of Christ's birth. Refusal to offer food or drink was not just stinginess, it was a breach of community trust, inviting supernatural ill will, or at the very least, mischief from the disappointed wassailers.
Wassailing thus became a crucial form of redistributive charity in a world without formal welfare. It legally blurred the lines between almsgiving, which was voluntary, and community expectation, which was mandatory. The tradition of caroling and the desire for performance merged with the church's liturgical practices to give rise to the medieval Christmas play. While many mystery plays were performed throughout the year, the Christmas season was a fertile ground for dramatic reenactments of the Nativity. These plays, initially staged inside the church by the clergy, quickly moved outside to the public square, where they became known as mystery plays or miracle plays. They depicted the stories of the shepherds, the magi, and sometimes more complex tales like the slaughter of the innocents. The impact of these plays on caroling was profound. The songs performed within the plays were often simple, dramatic narrative verses in the vernacular, perfectly suited for the popular carol style. They became educational tools, weaving together the liturgical message with the secular joy of performance. The medieval Christmas performance space, be it the village green for a play or the Lord's door for a wassail, was a true intersection of faith, folklore, and drama. Wassailing was not exclusively focused on people. It was also performed for the agricultural health of the land, demonstrating its deep pagan ties to fertility rites. This was particularly true in the orchard-rich regions of England, where the practice was known as apple tree wassailing. On either Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, or Epiphany Eve, depending on the region, farmers and villagers would process into the apple orchards. They would sing to the trees, sprinkle the roots with cider from the wassail bowl, and sometimes place pieces of toast soaked in the liquor in the branches. The purpose was to ensure a fruitful harvest and to scare away evil spirits or crows that might harm the crop. Loud noises were often employed, shouting, drumming, or firing guns to chase away the malevolent energies of winter. This custom is a direct echo of the Yule rituals of honoring the land to encourage the sun and fertility. The church tolerated these customs because they were seen as harmless agrarian superstitions, easily contained within the Christian calendar, and they did not directly challenge core doctrine. This fusion of Christian timing with pagan intent allowed a vital, magical aspect of the season to endure. The inherent dual nature of caroling and wassailing, the sacred message mixed with the often profane delivery, created a deep moral ambiguity that would later become a flashpoint for conflict. Charity versus coercion. Was the wassail a virtuous act of Christian charity, or was it a ritualized form of aggressive coercion, where the poor used the festive license to demand goods from the rich? In practice, it was both. Worship versus drunkenness. While the Franciscans intended the carol to be an act of worship, the reality was that wassailers were often drunk, and their performances were interspersed with ribald songs and excessive noise. This ambiguity led to the eventual Puritan condemnation of the holiday. For the stricter Protestant reformers, caroling and wassailing were not customs of community and charity. They were examples of popish superstition and riot. They saw the mask-wearing, the aggressive demands for money, the drunkenness, and the pagan agrarian rites as proof that Christmas was an unholy festival, the devil's holiday, cloaked in Christian guise. Paradoxically, it was the very popular, unbannable nature of these customs that ensured their survival. Even when authorities attempted to suppress Christmas entirely, people continued to sing and share the cup, because these acts were not just religious, they were essential social and survival rituals woven into the fabric of the community. The legacy of caroling and wassailing is thus complex. They are the sounds of medieval reciprocity, the proof that the Christmas spirit was rooted in the duty of the community to care for its own, and the enduring memory of the winter's darkness conquered by the simple shared act of song and drink. Puritan backlash, when Christmas was banned in England and the colonies. The raucous 12-day feast of medieval Christmas, complete with its lords of misrule,
drunken wassails and dancing was a powerful testament to the holiday's pagan resilience and the church's strategic cultural compromise. Yet this very merriment would ultimately provoke the fiercest ideological attack in the history of the holiday. The 17th century witnessed a radical shift, a sustained, theologically driven campaign led by Puritan reformers who sought not merely to purify Christmas, but to abolish it entirely. This backlash, which briefly succeeded in banning Christmas in both England and the early American colonies, was a pivotal event, forcing Christmas underground and dramatically shaping its eventual quiet re-emergence in the New World. The Puritan movement, a stricter branch of Protestantism, seeking to purify the Church of England of all traces of Catholic and Popish practices, viewed the traditional Christmas celebration with absolute theological horror. Their objections were profound, principled, and multi-layered, revolving around the absolute authority of Scripture. 1. The absence of scriptural authority, or sola scriptura. The primary Puritan argument was that Christmas was a man-made holiday. Since the Bible did not command the celebration of Christ's birth, nor did it specify the date, its observance was deemed an unwarranted addition to the divine calendar, and therefore an act of idolatry. They adhered to the regulative principle of worship, which dictated that anything not explicitly commanded in Scripture must be forbidden in worship. 2. Pagan contamination. The Reformers saw the persistent pagan elements, the greenery, the feasting, the fires, and the New Year revelry, not as harmless customs, but as abominable remnants of heathenism. They famously referred to Christmas as Saturn's Mass, seeing the continuing influence of Saturnalia and Yule as proof that the holiday was fundamentally unholy. 3. Moral corruption. For the Puritans, the holiday's social character was intolerable. They condemned the widespread drunkenness, promiscuity, gambling, and idle sports associated with the 12 days. They believed these excesses encouraged sloth and immorality, directly contradicting the somber piety and constant labor ethic they championed. They hated the Lord of Misrule, seeing him not as a safety valve, but as a devil's agent ushering in a period of sanctioned sin. The Puritans preferred to fast and meditate on their sins on December 25th, viewing the day as a time for solemn reflection, not riotous joy. The test of medieval Christmas, the raunchy feast of the 12 days, was evidence of both the deep roots of pagan celebration in popular culture and the Church's strategic decision to absorb these customs rather than to attempt to fully eradicate them. Puritan theological objections led to a major cultural and political conflict. The inherent dual nature of Christmas, a sacred message mixed with the often profane delivery, created a deep moral ambiguity that would later become a flashpoint for conflict. The theological objections of the Puritans were translated into political action during the turbulent years of the English Civil War, 1442 to 1451. As Parliament, dominated by Puritans, gained control over the monarchy and the Church of England, they moved swiftly to dismantle the traditional religious and social calendar. In 1444, the Puritan-led Parliament formally passed an ordinance abolishing the Feast of Christmas, along with Easter and Whitsun, Pentecost, and replaced them with mandatory days of fasting and prayer. The ruling explicitly stated that the purpose of the abolition was to root out superstition and profaneness. The abolition was met with deep resentment by the common populace, who viewed the 12 days as their guaranteed right to rest and merriment. The plum pudding riots in cities across England, people rioted in the streets, often shouting, "No Christmas, no King." One famous incident involved a mob storming a Puritan-run meeting house to demand access to their traditional plum puddings and ale. The ban officially remained in place until the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. Though the laws were repealed, the damage was done. The Puritan period had successfully severed the deep historical and cultural continuity of the medieval Christmas in England, leaving a legacy of ambivalence toward the holiday that persisted for over a century. The Puritan crusade against Christmas was even more successful and long-lasting in the American colonies, particularly in New England. The settlers of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, arriving in the 1620s, sought to establish a city upon a hill, a pure, uncorrupted society based entirely on scriptural law. For them, abolishing Christmas was a non-negotiable step in establishing a righteous commonwealth.
Formal prohibition, Massachusetts Bay. In 1659, the Massachusetts General Court passed a law specifically banning the observance of Christmas. The law was severe. Anyone caught feasting, refusing to work, or engaging in any festive activity on December 25th was subject to a 5-shilling fine. This was not just a legal restriction, but a social directive to treat Christmas Day exactly like any other working day. Enforced work. Colonial records show that officials actively patrolled the streets of Boston to ensure no shops were closed, no taverns were celebrating, and no one was idle. The children in New England schools were notably kept in session on Christmas Day, while their counterparts in Virginia were typically given the day off. For nearly 22 years, until the law was quietly repealed in 1681, Christmas was simply a normal workday in the most influential colony in North America. This sustained ban created a powerful cultural void. Unlike England, where the old customs were remembered and revived after the Restoration, in Puritan New England, an entire generation grew up without any tradition of Christmas. The holiday simply ceased to exist in the collective memory, replaced by the Puritan observance of the annual Thanksgiving Day, a scripturally authorized feast that celebrated bounty and community without the trappings of popish superstition. While New England was defined by its aggressive suppression of the holiday, the southern colonies, particularly Virginia and Maryland, presented a stark contrast. Settled primarily by Anglicans, members of the Church of England, who maintained a stronger loyalty to the crown and its liturgical calendar, Christmas was never banned. In the southern plantation economy, Christmas was embraced as a time of immense hierarchical feasting that was a direct continuation of medieval traditions. Feasting and social control. Plantation owners used the 12 days as an opportunity to reinforce social order through generosity. Slaves and indentured servants were given time off, often given extra rations of food and rum, and encouraged to participate in dancing and games. This was a classic instance of paternalistic generosity, mirroring the Lord of Misrule's brief reversal, a temporary license granted by the master to ensure obedience and loyalty throughout the rest of the year. The importance of hospitality. Southern Christmas was defined by lavish hospitality, open houses, and week-long feasting, maintaining the English gentry ideal of seasonal abundance. The contrast was clear. New England fought Christmas for its pagan and immoral roots. The South embraced it precisely because its hierarchical structure and feasting reinforced the existing social and economic order. This regional divide cemented a foundational split in early American culture that would influence the holiday's development for centuries. Even after the official bans were lifted, the impact of the Puritan backlash lingered. When the American Revolution occurred, the new republic was wary of importing any holiday associated with the excesses of the English monarchy and the old, corrupt Church of England. Christmas was so far from being a revered holiday that Congress even met in session on Christmas Day, 1776, to debate the war effort, treating it as a normal business day. For decades after independence, Christmas remained a minor holiday in the United States, marked by sporadic celebrations in southern and middle colonies, but largely ignored in the former Puritan strongholds of New England. It lacked cultural coherence, theological seriousness, and social consensus. The ban had successfully drained the holiday of its public energy and pushed its practice into private, often secretive domestic spheres.
The Puritan movement's confrontation with the heathen customs fundamentally altered the trajectory of the holiday in America. It forced Christmas to go silent, clearing the way for its later, complete reinvention in the 19th century, a reinvention that would sanitize the holiday of its rowdy medieval excess and mold it into the domestic, sentimental, and child-centric celebration recognizable today. The ghost of the Puritan ban remains the key reason why America's Christmas traditions are so much newer and less rooted than those of Europe. A silent century, keeping the Yuletide secret in North America. The official repeal of the anti-Christmas laws in the late 17th century did not mark the triumphant return of the holiday in North America. Instead, it inaugurated what historians often term the Silent Century, a period spanning the late colonial era through the early Republic, roughly 1680s to 1820s, where Christmas lacked any unified cultural or national presence. Having been aggressively suppressed by the Puritans, the holiday had lost its public voice, its unifying communal rituals, and its reputation for religious seriousness. The Yuletide spirit, stripped of its legal right to exist, retreated into localized pockets, surviving only in fragmented traditions kept alive within the shadows of private homes or thriving dangerously in chaotic, semi-outlawed forms. This silence was profound, and it is the key reason why the American Christmas of the 19th century had to be almost entirely invented anew. The most striking feature of the silent century was the complete fracture of Christmas observance along geographical and denominational lines, resulting in three distinct, competing realities. 1. New England's continuing hostility. In the former Puritan strongholds of Massachusetts and Connecticut, the ban had been culturally successful. Christmas remained a normal workday, and celebrating it often required social courage. If celebrated at all, it was a quiet, private nod to tradition, often kept hidden from neighbors. Public opinion still viewed the holiday as an unnecessary frivolity tied to popish excess and English monarchy. The Southern patronistic feast. The Anglicans of Virginia and the Carolinas maintained the English medieval tradition, but warped it through the lens of the plantation economy. Christmas here was a public spectacle of generosity, designed to reinforce the hierarchical system. Masters gave temporary freedom and large feasts to their enslaved population, fostering a dangerous temporary license that often erupted in disruptive, sometimes violent outbreaks of revelry, including masked processions and loud, armed carousing. The celebration was public, but often unruly and socially destabilizing. The quiet, eclectic middle colonies. Colonies like Pennsylvania, Quakers, and New York, Dutch and German settlers, offered a more moderate but fragmented approach. The Dutch settlers maintained their distinct tradition of Sinterklaas, St. Nicholas, celebrated on December 6th, which was primarily focused on children and gift-giving. The Germans were beginning the slow process of domesticating the Christmas tree and quiet family observance. Here, Christmas was neither banned nor rowdy. It was simply one of many competing ethnic and religious midwinter observances, lacking universal dominance. This regional fragmentation meant that by the time of the Revolution, Christmas was seen less as a national holiday and more as a symbol of outdated English aristocracy or religious extremism. The political and ideological climate of the young United States further perpetuated the silent century. The new republic was founded on ideals of reason, simplicity, and freedom from old-world corruption. Christmas was anathema to all three. Anti-monarchical sentiment. As a holiday tied to the liturgical calendar of the Church of England and the excesses of the monarchy, the very structures the U.S. had just overthrown, Christmas carried the baggage of being un-American and monarchical. Republican austerity. Leaders of the Revolutionary era, such as Thomas Jefferson, preferred the celebration of the 4th of July, a holiday of civic virtue and rational freedom, over the religious and feasting chaos of Christmas. Congress famously met on December 25, 1776, treating it as any other business day, setting a powerful precedent for its irrelevance in public life. The lack of labor. In a nation obsessed with expansion, hard work, and productivity, the notion of taking 12 days off for guaranteed idleness and revelry was economically suspect and morally undesirable. Consequently, for decades after 1776, Christmas was not a federal holiday, nor was it generally recognized in the public sphere. The only way the Christmas spirit survived this period was by retreating entirely into the private, domestic sphere. Without the public square, the court, or the major churches to sanction the feasting, the celebration became quiet, small, and focused on the immediate family. Secret decorations. In New England, if families dared to decorate, it was done subtly, using small sprigs of holly and mistletoe hidden within homes to avoid the disapproval of Puritan elders. The festive atmosphere was literally kept a secret, creating a deep association between Christmas and the warmth and protection of the hearth, out away from the judgmental outside world. Oral tradition. Customs like the Yule log, caroling, usually performed very quietly or only among close friends, and specialized baking, like plum cakes, were passed down
through oral tradition, relying on the memory of grandparents who had emigrated from Europe before the bans. These traditions became sentimental artifacts of a forgotten past. The rise of domestic charity. The focus on large public medieval feasts was replaced by private acts of charity, particularly directed toward children and immediate family. This shift was crucial. By making Christmas about the child in the home, the holiday stripped away its most politically dangerous elements, class reversal, public drunkenness, and preserved only its most virtuous, giving and family love. Paradoxically, where Christmas was celebrated publicly in places like New York City, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, it was often done with the rowdy aggression that confirmed the Puritans' worst fears and further discouraged public acceptance. In early 19th century New York, for example, Christmas was not a day of domestic peace, but a time of antics. Poor laborers, often drunk and wearing ragged costumes, would roam the wealthy districts, demanding entry, food, and money, a chaotic continuation of the medieval wassail tradition. This practice often degenerated into vandalism, begging with menace, and minor riots. These public disturbances were a severe threat to the stability and burgeoning bourgeois sensibilities of the early American cities. The upper classes, who sought to impose order and quiet piety on the new republic, viewed these chaotic Christmas revels as dangerous signs of social breakdown. This fear created a powerful, immediate need among the American elite to sanitize and domesticate the holiday. The chaos of the Southern and urban Christmas was a direct catalyst for the later Victorian reinvention. By the 1820s, the silent century was drawing to a close. Christmas in America was marginalized, fragmented, and often unruly holiday. It was not a beloved tradition, it was a problem that needed solving. The Puritan legacy had created a cultural void where no shared American tradition existed. The chaos of the Southern and urban celebrations had created a social problem that terrified the rising middle class. The only positive image of the holiday was the quiet, sentimental warmth of the home, preserved mainly by Dutch and German immigrants. The stage was set for the holiday to be entirely rebuilt. The materials for this reinvention were the fragments preserved during the silent century, the Germanic evergreen, the Dutch Sinterklaas, and the sentimental focus on the private home. The lack of a strong, unified medieval tradition freed American writers and artists to create a new, distinct, and safe version of Christmas, one that was not about the Lord of Misrule, but about the gentle, benevolent figure who only visited the children of good, quiet, middle-class homes. The chaos of the silent century inadvertently gifted the Americans the blank slate necessary for the Victorian age to write the modern Christmas story. The Victorian Revival: How Washington Irving and Charles Dickens Rescued Christmas. The silent century left Christmas in the United States fragmented, ignored in New England, and plagued by public disorder elsewhere. By the 1820s, the holiday was neither religious nor national. It was a societal problem.
This chaotic void provided the perfect stage for a dramatic cultural transformation led not by priests or politicians, but by writers and artists. The Victorian revival was a sentimental, romantic campaign that spanned both sides of the Atlantic, utilizing the power of literature to systematically replace the unruly traditions of the Lord of Misrule with the gentle domestic sanctity of the family hearth. The architects of their profound rescue operation were the American writer Washington Irving and the English novelist Charles Dickens. The initial steps toward reinventing the holiday began in New York, a city struggling to impose order upon its chaotic, street-level Christmas celebrations. The American elite, concerned by the annual outbreaks of antics and masked revelry, desired a quiet, domestic version of the holiday, one that affirmed social cohesion rather than undermining it. This desire for a safe, picturesque Christmas was perfectly met by Washington Irving, 1883 to 1859. In 1819, Irving published the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon Gent, which included 4 essays dedicated to the English Christmas he imagined rather than the one he personally knew. Irving's vision was a powerful act of nostalgic fabrication. 1. The idealization of the past. Irving idealized the English manor Christmas, a place where the Lord was generous, the servants were loyal, and the entire community gathered in harmony, ignoring the historical reality of the Lord of Misrule and social tension. He painted a picture of a benevolent, hierarchical feast designed to foster goodwill between classes. 2. The sentimental focus. His essays emphasized old-fashioned customs, the solemn procession of the Yule log, the ringing of bells, the sharing of the feast, and the gathering of the extended family. He sanitized the carols, replacing the demand for tribute with the beauty of the song. 3. The domestic anchor. Crucially, he presented Christmas as an antidote to modern industrial stress and urban chaos. His idealized celebration was centered within the home, a warm, inviting refuge from the cold world outside. Irving's writing was profoundly influential in America because it offered the burgeoning middle class a sanitized, usable tradition that did not carry the baggage of the Puritan past or the threat of urban riot. He gave American families a blueprint for a quiet, respectable Christmas based on sentimental ideals of Old English hospitality. His work prepared the American consciousness to embrace a domestic rather than a public holiday. 2 decades after Irving set the sentimental scene, the campaign was completed by the English literary giant Charles Dickens. The England of the 1940s was facing its own crisis. Rapid industrialization had created vast social divides, poverty, and misery, leading to a profound cultural loss of community. Dickens saw Christmas as the perfect vehicle to preach a gospel of generosity and social responsibility. In 1843, Dickens published A Christmas Carol. The novella was an immediate, overwhelming success, achieving a cultural impact unparalleled by any other work of fiction in the history of the holiday. 1. Redefining the holiday's meaning. Dickens fundamentally remoralized Christmas. He stripped the holiday of its liturgical dryness and its pagan chaos, instead defining it as a time for humanitarian and charitable feeling. The spirit of Christmas was no longer theological, it was ethical. It meant empathy, generosity toward the poor, represented by Timmy Tim, and the joy of redemption, represented by Scrooge. 2. The power of memory and nostalgia. The story works by using Christmas past to teach the present. This narrative structure reinforced the Victorian sense that the true Christmas was something old, pure, and nearly forgotten, an idea that resonated deeply with Americans who were struggling to remember their own holiday past. 3. Sanctifying the feast. Dickens validated the enjoyment of food and warmth, but reframed it. The feasting was not drunken excess, but a tool for bonding and sharing. The famous descriptions of the Christmas goose and plum pudding turned these foods into sentimental icons of family love, not just gluttony. The immense popularity of A Christmas Carol across the United States provided the newly invented American Christmas with its moral and emotional core. It gave families, regardless of their religious denomination, a universal, secular, and sentimental reason to celebrate, to be charitable, to be kind, and to embrace the family unit. The combined influence of Irving and Dickens successfully redefined what a proper Christmas looked like for the rising American middle class. This new model was embraced for its ability to solve the twin problems of the silent century. Social order. By confining the holiday's energy to the private home, the new Christmas model eliminated the public disorder and riots that had plagued urban centers. The celebrations became quiet, predictable, and respectable. Child-centric focus. The Victorian ideal shifted the holiday's focus from the adults who had historically engaged in drunkenness and misrule to the innocence of the child. Children became the recipients of gifts and the central moral compass of the season, like Timmy Tim. This focus on innocence was safe, sentimental, and uncontroversial. This child-centric domestic focus provided the critical environment for the most significant innovation of the era, the complete overhaul of the gift bringer, which would be solidified by the work of New York writers and artists following Irving's blueprint. The transatlantic literary axis cemented the Victorian Christmas as a unified cultural product. American publishers rushed to print Dickens' work, and American ministers frequently quoted his ethical lessons, even using Timmy Tim as a moral teaching tool. The impact was felt across American media and commerce.
The mince pie transformation. The traditional Christmas pie, which had been criticized for its excessive richness and associated with medieval gluttony, was sanitized. It became smaller, sweeter, and symbolic of the holy relics of the Magi due to its mix of spices, transforming its reputation from a symbol of sin to a symbol of domestic piety. Sentimental imagery. Illustrated editions of Dickens and Irving popularized images of snow, roaring fires, and closed family circles. These images, often mass-produced on early Christmas cards, quickly became the visual vocabulary of the American holiday. The Victorian revival was fundamentally an act of cultural sanitation. It took the raw materials of ancient feasts, the fires, the feasting, the giving, and passed them through the filter of 19th-century middle-class morality. The result was a holiday that was both deeply traditional, it seemed to resurrect a lost past, and entirely modern, it solved modern social problems. The rescue operation by Irving and Dickens was so effective that Americans quickly forgot the actual history of their Christmas, the bans, the riots, the lords of misrule. They embraced the new sentimental narrative, setting the final stage for the introduction of the modern Santa Claus and the German Christmas tree, which would complete the American holiday's modern form. A Visit from St. Nick, the poem that defined the modern Santa Claus. The great Victorian rescue of Christmas, initiated by the sentimental literature of Washington Irving and Charles Dickens, provided the holiday with its moral purpose, charity, and its physical setting, the home. Yet the American celebration still lacked a central, universally recognized and benign figure to embody the new spirit. The remnants of the old gift-givers were scattered. The terrifying aerial traveler Odin, the Catholic bishop St. Nicholas of Myra, the unruly Dutch Sinterklaas, and the English Father Christmas. These figures were fragmented, often contradictory, and sometimes frightening to children. The American elite needed a safe, domestic, and non-denominational gift-bringer to preside over the newly sanitized holiday. This demand for a unified figure was met, almost perfectly and accidentally, by a single slender poem first published anonymously in the Troy, New York Sentinel newspaper on December 23, 1823. The poem, originally titled A Visit from St. Nicholas, but universally known today by its opening line, "'Twas the night before Christmas," was not merely a piece of verse, it was a cultural revolution in rhyming couplets. Attributed decades later to New York biblical scholar Clement Clark Moore, though some historical debate persists regarding Henry Livingston, Jr., the poem instantly and indelibly etched the blueprint for the modern, child-centric American Santa Claus. A visit from St. Nick achieved a historical feat by synthesizing disparate and often conflicting European traditions into one cohesive, charming, and gentle character, a figure entirely safe for the American middle-class home. The poem borrowed the name and the spirit of gift-giving from the Dutch tradition that persisted in New York. The term St. Nick, or Sinterklaas, which literally means St. Nicholas, was kept, ensuring continuity with the colonial past, but stripped of the Catholic bishop's robes and religious dogma. It retained the essential mechanism of the pagan winter god, the aerial journey, the descent through the chimney, a route associated with magic and spirits in Yule lore, and the midwinter timing. The terrifying, wild aspect of the journey was replaced by the clatter and cheer of a sleigh drawn by reindeer. The English Father Christmas incorporated the image of the bearded, robust, benevolent, and slightly portly man associated with the traditional English holiday feasting, sanitizing the figure's former association with drinking and misrule. The new figure was a hybrid. He was Dutch by name, Norse by transportation, and English by physique, but wholly American by temperament. Jolly, efficient, non-threatening, and focused solely on the home and its children. The poem provided the first clear, detailed, and universally accepted physical description of the figure, establishing the core iconography that would quickly become standardized across North America. The physique. He was described as chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, with a small round belly that shook like a bowl full of jelly. This deliberately replaced the towering, gaunt, or frightening figures of older traditions with a figure of comfort and harmless merriment. The poem explicitly defined his rosy cheeks, sparkling eyes, and white beard. The transportation. The poem was revolutionary in introducing reindeer and the sleigh. By giving St. Nick 8 tiny named reindeer, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen, it firmly established the mechanism of his aerial delivery system, replacing the vague, terrifying wild hunt of Odin with a magical yet endearing mode of travel. The method of entry. The poem formalized the descent down the chimney and the filling of stockings. This ingenious device created a ritual of anticipation for the child, tied the gift-giving directly to the architecture of the home, and cemented the idea that the interaction was secret and magical. The poem was instrumental in permanently shifting the focus of the Christmas season away from Epiphany, January 6th, and toward Christmas Eve, December 24th. By framing the visit the night before Christmas, the poem gave Americans a specific, magical moment to anticipate, focusing all the energy of the season on the single, intense moment of St. Nicholas's arrival. Furthermore, the poem completed the child-centric transformation started by the Victorians. The entire narrative is focused on what St. Nick does for the children. He checks them while they sleep. His mission is to fill their stockings with toys, and his departure is marked by a wish for their happiness. This firmly established the American Santa Claus as a figure of parental agency, a gentle tool used by mothers and fathers to reward virtue and encourage domestic peace, which was the ultimate goal of the middle-class reinvention. While Moore's poem provided the textual blueprint, the figure's visual standardization was completed by the German-American political cartoonist Thomas Nast, 1840 to 1902, over 4 decades later. Starting with his drawings for Harper's Weekly during the Civil War and continuing through the 1880s, Nast illustrated Moore's poem. He added crucial visual elements that refined the image. The workshop at the North Pole. Nast created the concept of Santa's home and workshop at the North Pole, transforming him from a simple traveler into a fixed national figure who represented American industrial efficiency, the making of toys. The red suit. While earlier illustrations showed Santa in various colors, brown, green, blue, Nast standardized the red fur-trimmed suit, borrowing elements from Northern European winter attire. The red suit became the definitive uniform, unifying the commercial imagery. The list. Nast introduced the visual of Santa checking his list of naughty and nice children, reinforcing the moral judgment and the ethical structure that the Victorian revival demanded. By the turn of the 20th century, the poem and Nast's drawings had effectively erased all memory of the regional, frightening, or religiously complicated gift-bringers. The new Santa Claus was a secular, amiable, and thoroughly American creation, ready to be deployed by Madison Avenue. The creation of the standardized visual Santa Claus was a bonanza for American commerce. The figure was instantly marketable, non-denominational, and universally understood. Department store grottos. The department stores quickly adopted Santa, using him as a primary tool to draw families and children into the retail centers, thus transforming the sentimental gift-giving of Dickens into a massive, organized commercial enterprise. Coca-Cola and the final polish. The final visual polish was applied in the 1930s by the artist Haddon Sundblom for the Coca-Cola Company. Sundblom's paintings, which refined Nast's image into the iconic, larger-than-life, incredibly jolly Santa Claus, cemented the figure's status as a global marketing icon. He ensured that the American Santa Claus was universally recognizable, blending the literary fantasy of Moore with the demands of modern advertising. The simple, powerful verse of A Visit from St. Nick remains the single most important document in the history of the American Christmas. It took the scattered, chaotic remnants of ancient paganism and religious doctrine and recast them into a gentle, domestic fantasy. It provided the unifying mythology, the visual blueprint, and the emotional anchor that allowed the holiday to transition from a period of historical conflict into the beloved, unified, and utterly modern spectacle that defines the American midwinter experience.
The German Connection. Introducing the Christmas tree to American homes. By the mid-19th century, the American Christmas had its moral compass, Dickens's charity, and its central secular figure, Moore's Santa Claus. Yet it still lacked a consistent, universally recognized visual centerpiece to anchor the domestic celebration. The final and arguably most potent element needed to solidify the modern holiday was an object that perfectly symbolized both the ancient yearning for life in winter and the contemporary emphasis on family and sentiment, the Christmas tree. This custom, steeped in the deep magic of Germanic folklore, was initially viewed with suspicion in America, but was ultimately introduced and championed by German immigrants, consolidated by royal influence, and embraced by a Victorian society desperate for novel, romantic traditions. The custom of bringing evergreens indoors to celebrate the solstice is arguably the oldest element of the Christmas season, predating Christianity by millennia. As discussed earlier, ancient cultures across the Northern Hemisphere used boughs of pine, holly, and ivy to symbolize life's persistence and to ward off the evil spirits associated with the darkest time of the year, or Yule. However, the specific tradition of bringing an entire decorated indoor tree originated in the Germanic lands of Central Europe. The precise origin is shrouded in folklore, but two major legends define its early Christianization. 1. Saint Boniface and the Thunder Oak, 8th century. Legend holds that Saint Boniface, an English missionary, encountered German pagans preparing to sacrifice a child beneath an enormous oak tree dedicated to Thor. Boniface felled the thunder oak, and when a fir tree miraculously sprang up in its place, he declared the triangular tree a symbol of the Holy Trinity, dedicating it to Christ. This story, whether true or not, provided the essential narrative, the Christianization of a pagan sacred tree. 2. The Paradise Tree, medieval period. In medieval German mystery plays performed on Christmas Eve, the feast day of Adam and Eve, a fir tree decorated with apples was used to represent the Paradise Tree, the tree of knowledge, in the Garden of Eden. Over time, as these public plays were suppressed,
the custom moved into private homes, where families would set up a small tree in their homes on December 24th, decorating it with communion wafers or pastries to symbolize the Eucharist, and later with candles. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the custom of the Lichterbaum, or Christbaum, Christmas tree, was firmly established in the Protestant regions of Germany, particularly Alsace. These trees were decorated not just with apples, but with brightly lit candles, transforming the domestic space into a representation of the heavens and the Star of Bethlehem. The Christmas tree arrived on American shores quietly, carried in the cultural baggage of German immigrants who settled primarily in Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic states in the 18th and early 19th centuries. The earliest documented instance is often credited to a German immigrant in Pennsylvania around the 1820s. However, the tree was met with resistance in mainstream American culture, particularly in Puritan-influenced New England. For decades, the custom was seen as strange, foreign, and superstitious. The fear of fire. Placing a highly flammable evergreen inside the home and covering it with lit candles was legitimately viewed as a terrifying fire hazard. Puritan skepticism. The New England mindset, which had fought so hard against popish superstition, viewed the tree as an overly festive, pagan, and unbiblical novelty, another example of German foolishness that detracted from the solemnity of the day. For the first half of the 19th century, the tree remained a fringe custom, a Yuletide secret confined to German-speaking enclaves, similar to how the Dutch Sinterklaas was contained in New York. The Christmas tree's path to universal acceptance in America did not begin in the United States. It began with the British royal family. This moment proved to be the critical tipping point, leveraging the immense cultural influence of the English monarchy on the American elite. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1840, Queen Victoria married her German cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Albert, seeking to celebrate the Christmas he remembered from his childhood, introduced the decorated tree to the royal residences. The Godey's Ladies Book feature, 1848. The custom achieved international fame in 1848 when the Illustrated London News published a sketch of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and their children gathered around a lavishly decorated Christmas tree at Windsor Castle. The following year, this sketch was reprinted in America's most influential women's magazine, Godey's Ladies Book, which circulated widely among the upwardly mobile middle class. The illustration was transformative. It presented the Christmas tree not as a pagan curiosity, but as an emblem of royalty, piety, and domestic bliss, the very values the Victorian American middle class aspired to. The drawing, subtly edited to remove the crown to make it more palatable for the Republican audience, recast the tree as the ultimate symbol of the sentimental, child-centered, and respectable holiday that Irving and Dickens had championed. Once sanitized by royal approval and literary sentiment, the Christmas tree became the perfect visual icon for the American holiday for several key reasons. 1. A focus on the child. The tree naturally became the magnet for gifts, transforming the ceremony of giving into a single picturesque moment. Children would wake up to find the tree illuminated and laden with presents, placing the child, not the adult feast or the religious service, at the center of the observance. The perfect sentimentality. The tree provided a physical, tangible object for families to decorate together, reinforcing the ideal of domestic unity that the Victorians idealized. The homemade ornaments, candles, and trinkets transformed the tree into a highly personalized artifact of family memory. The commercial opportunity. The tree was an instant economic engine. It required new products, tinsel, glass ornaments, initially imported from Germany, specialized stands, and of course, the tree itself. The tree successfully integrated the commercial imperative into the sentimental ritual, bridging the gap between commerce and charity that had defined the holiday's struggle since Saturnalia. The rapid adoption was remarkable. By the 1870s, the tree had moved from a fringe German custom to a mainstream American institution. It was now displayed not just in private homes, but in churches, public halls, and schools, signaling the complete national acceptance of the modern, reinvented Christmas. The introduction of the Christmas tree completed the modern American holiday's physical structure. Santa Claus brought the gifts and provided the secular mythology. The tree, German, Victorian, was the sacred object that housed the gifts and provided the light and domestic focus. Together, they created a perfectly balanced, emotionally compelling, and commercially viable holiday structure that transcended regional and denominational differences. The tree was the ultimate symbol of syncretism, a pagan evergreen now lit by Christian candles, standing as a silent testament to the genius of cultural integration. It was the final and indispensable piece of the American Christmas mosaic, marking the end of the silent century and the beginning of the holiday's modern dominance. Department store magic, commercialism, and the rise of holiday shopping. By the 1870s, the American Christmas was successfully sanitized, domesticated, and morally redeemed by the literary efforts of Irving and Dickens. It had a safe, secular hero in Santa Claus and a beautiful visual icon in the Christmas tree. Yet the final, and perhaps most powerful transformation was not engineered by theologians or poets, but by retail entrepreneurs. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed the birth of the modern department store and the systematic co-option of Christmas, turning the sentimental holiday into the most dominant period of commercial consumption on the American calendar. This era cemented the inextricable link between the spirit of Christmas and the act of holiday shopping. The rise of holiday shopping was a direct consequence of the Industrial Revolution and the attendant changes in American society. By the mid-19th century, factories were churning out an unprecedented volume of affordable, mass-produced goods, dolls, games, metal toys, and specialized Christmas decorations, like glass ornaments from Germany. Simultaneously, the burgeoning middle class had the disposable income and the cultural desire to engage in the sentimental practices championed by Victorian literature.
The American economy needed a mechanism to funnel this new production capacity to this new consumer class. Christmas provided the perfect psychological and temporal framework for this mechanism. The time anchor. The holiday offered a fixed, mandatory period of the year, December, when society expected and demanded gift-giving. The moral imperative. Dickens's narrative had provided a moral justification for spending. The consumption of goods was no longer sinful excess, as the Puritans had argued, but a virtuous act of charity and familial love. Purchasing gifts for children became a moral obligation tied to demonstrating parental affection. The department store was the physical innovation designed to exploit this confluence of supply, demand, and moral justification. In the late 1800s, stores like R.H. Macy & Co. in New York, Marshall Field's in Chicago, and Wanamaker's in Philadelphia transformed retail. They were designed not just as places to buy things, but as elaborate, theatrical, and beautiful public spaces, the new cathedrals of commerce, that offered a unified, luxurious shopping experience. These stores quickly realized that Christmas was their most valuable asset and began pioneering retail strategies that remain standard today. The Christmas window display. The invention of the dedicated, highly artistic Christmas window display, Macy's was a pioneer, became a primary tool to attract crowds and define the festive mood. These displays used the newly popularized Santa Claus and Christmas tree imagery to blur the line between fantasy and commerce, inviting the public to step out of the cold, mundane street and into a world of holiday magic. The Santa Claus Grotto was the brilliant piece of commercial theater. In 1890, James Edgar, a dry goods store owner in Brockton, Massachusetts, donned a Santa costume to attract customers. The idea exploded. By the turn of the century, nearly every major department store featured a Santa, a symbolic home, the grotto, and a line of children waiting to make their demands.
This institutionalized the connection between Santa and the consumption of toys, teaching an entire generation that Santa's magic flowed directly through the store. The toy department. Stores vastly expanded their toy departments and moved them to prime locations, establishing toys as the primary commodity of the holiday season, a direct function of the new child-centric focus. The store's ability to market Christmas was hugely dependent on the standardized, non-controversial image provided by Clement Clark Moore and Thomas Nast. Nast's drawings, which depicted Santa as a fixed, robust figure with a home workshop and a list of good and bad children, were perfectly suited for commercial replication. The figure was non-religious, could be marketed to all faiths or non-faiths. Moral. His naughty or nice list reinforced Victorian ethics and encouraged good behavior in children, pleasing parents. Visually consistent. The red suit and white beard became a global trademark, simplifying advertising and store decoration. The collaboration between Nast's art and the department store's staging was the ultimate act of cultural synthesis, turning a literary fantasy into the single most effective marketing tool in American history. The growth of holiday shopping was so rapid that it demanded the creation of a defined shopping season. The period between Thanksgiving and Christmas was deliberately marketed as the necessary window for retail activity. This strategic positioning was genius. 1. Thanksgiving as the launch pad. Thanksgiving, a distinctly American, non-denominational holiday, provided the perfect psychological shift. The day of national reflection and gratitude provided a clean break from the annual work cycle, positioning the next day, Black Friday, as the logical, festive beginning of the Christmas shopping period. And 2, credit and installment plans. The department stores facilitated increased spending by pioneering the use of credit and installment plans for the holiday season, which allowed the middle class to spend beyond their immediate means, fundamentally changing the economic landscape and ensuring massive year-end profits for retailers. The period also witnessed the establishment of Christmas Club savings programs by banks, which encouraged people to save small amounts throughout the year specifically for holiday spending. This formalized the expectation that consumption was a structured annual economic necessity. The commercial success of the holiday also created massive logistical challenges, which forced modernization of the American infrastructure. The rapid increase in mail-order gift buying from catalogs like Sears, Roebuck & Co., and the sheer volume of letters written to Santa Claus stretched the U.S. Postal Service to its breaking point. The pressure of Christmas mail became a driving force for hiring temporary workers, the first widespread use of seasonal employment, improving delivery infrastructure. The need to deliver millions of Christmas parcels accelerated the improvement of national shipping and postal services. And the dead letter office solution. The volume of letters addressed to Santa Claus became so enormous that the post office had to create mechanisms to handle them, eventually leading to authorized mail carriers and volunteers answering them, a unique and charming government acknowledgement of the commercial fantasy. The rise of holiday shopping, therefore, was not merely a cultural phenomenon, it was a catalyst for fundamental changes in American labor, finance, and infrastructure. By the early 20th century, the transformation was complete. Christmas was no longer a time of social upheaval, Saturnalia, or doctrinal purity, Puritanism. It was a celebration of middle-class American affluence and domesticity, measured primarily by the exchange of purchased goods. The commercialization of Christmas provided the holiday with its final, immutable identity, a highly synchronized, emotionally charged, and economically essential event. The magic of the department store was the ability to package the ancient human yearning for light and love, wrap it in the sentimental narratives of the Victorians, and sell it back to the public as the ultimate expression of the Christmas spirit. This triumphant commercial synthesis ensured that Christmas, once an endangered tradition, became the most powerful and enduring cultural event in the modern American world. a melting pot holiday, integrating immigrant traditions in the U.S. By the close of the 19th century, the American Christmas had achieved its modern, standardized form, largely dictated by Anglo-American sentimentality, German iconography, and Dutch or New York mythology. This model, child-centric, tree-focused, and commercially driven, was a powerful cultural force. However, the United States was simultaneously undergoing one of the largest immigration waves in its history, bringing millions of new inhabitants from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, and beyond. These new Americans did not easily discard their ancestral ways. Instead, they forced a slow, continuous process of adaptation, ensuring that the American Christmas remained a vibrant, diverse, and fluid melting pot holiday, enriching the national experience with centuries-old traditions that transcended the Anglo-Germanic core. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw massive influxes of Italian, Polish, Irish, and Portuguese immigrants, primarily Catholic, into the industrializing cities of America. For these communities, Christmas observance was deeply rooted in specific religious liturgies and family customs that contrasted sharply with the secular, materialistic American model. 1. The presepio, or nativity scene. Italian immigrants placed supreme importance on the nativity scene, a tradition that dates back to St. Francis of Assisi. In Italian-American homes, the elaborate presepio, often the focal point of the home, far surpassing the importance of the Christmas tree, was a tangible three-dimensional teaching tool focusing on the religious core of the holiday. This dedication to the presepio served as a gentle counterpressure to the American obsession with Santa and the commercial spectacle, subtly reasserting the sacred origin of the feast. 2. The Feast of the Seven Fishes, Vigilia. Southern Italian traditions introduced the practice of the Feast of the Seven Fishes on Christmas Eve. This elaborate, meatless meal was an act of religious observance, a vigil, vigilia, tied to abstinence before the Christmas Mass. This culinary tradition, intensely personal and focused on specific cultural identity, provided a potent alternative to the standard American feast of turkey or ham, marking Christmas Eve as a profound act of cultural memory and piety.
3. St. Nicholas versus Befana. While American children focused on Santa Claus, Italian families often maintained the tradition of La Befana, a kindly, chimney-descending witch who delivered small gifts or coal for bad behavior on Epiphany, January 6th. This custom served as a cultural anchor, maintaining the importance of the Epiphany within the American calendar, a day that the secular American system often ignored. The integration of these traditions ensured that American Christmas was not uniformly secular. It contained pockets of intense, visible religious devotion rooted in specific ethnic practices. Immigrants from Poland, Ukraine, and other Slavic countries brought with them ancient traditions tied to strict fasting, symbolic meals, and unique gift-bringers. 1. The Ogilia, Holy Supper. Polish and Lithuanian families introduced the concept of the Holy Supper, or Ogilia, on Christmas Eve. This meal was defined by its strict absence of meat and its symbolic use of 12 dishes, representing the 12 apostles. Crucially, the Ogilia often begins only when the first star appears in the night sky, a ritualistic nod to the Star of Bethlehem. Before eating, families share the oplatek, or thin, unleavened Christmas wafer, breaking off pieces for each other and exchanging wishes for peace and prosperity. This custom served as a powerful reminder of communion and family solidarity, providing a moment of profound spiritual connection amidst the surrounding American commercial rush. 2. Symbolic feasting. Slavic traditions heavily utilize symbolic foods such as kutia, a sweet grain pudding which had ancient, possibly pagan roots in honoring ancestors. These food traditions ensured that for millions of Americans, the holiday meal remained a highly ritualized event, distinct from the Anglo-American feast. Scandinavian immigrants, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish, arriving in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest, had to contend with the existing American Santa Claus, whose image was derived, in part, from their own folklore. 1. The Yule Book and Nisei. Scandinavian traditions feature the Yule Book, Christmas goat, or Nisei, a gnome-like house spirit, who often delivered gifts. In America, these figures were largely subsumed into the dominant Santa narrative, but their essence was maintained through specialized decorations and storytelling. The integration was one of compromise. Children would receive gifts from Santa, but the home might still be decorated with Nisei or Tomte figurines, preserving a subtle cultural memory. 2. St. Lucia Day. Swedes maintain the observance of St. Lucia Day, December 13th, where the eldest daughter of the family dresses in white, wears a crown of candles, and serves coffee and sweet rolls to her family. This celebration introduced a beautiful, light-focused tradition early in the month, serving as a unique American expression of hope and light that predates Christmas Day. As the 20th century progressed, immigrants and communities from Mexico, Puerto Rico, and other Latin American countries enriched the holiday with vibrant, prolonged, and community-focused celebrations. 1. The Posadas. The Mexican tradition of Las Posadas, the Inns, is a 9-day devotional festival beginning on December 16th. Communities enact a solemn nightly procession representing Mary and Joseph seeking lodging, stopping at various homes to sing carols and pray before concluding with a large fiesta. This communal, street-level performance contrasts sharply with the quiet American domesticity, reintroducing the idea of Christmas as a public, communal pilgrimage rather than just a private event. 2. Piñatas and Navidad. The use of the piñata, often shaped like a star to symbolize the Star of Bethlehem and broken to represent the struggle against sin, was introduced. This lively, participatory custom injected a uniquely interactive, joyous, and non-Anglo element into the festive period. The overall effect of this vast influx of global customs was the creation of an à la carte American Christmas. Unlike the rigid traditions of Europe, where communities typically followed one set of customs, the American holiday allowed families to choose and blend elements. A family might adhere to the secular commercial Santa and tree model, but integrate the Seven Fishes feast on Christmas Eve, Italian, share the Opłatek, Polish, and decorate with the Scandinavian Nisei. This blending was actively encouraged by the department stores themselves, which quickly learned to stock ornaments, foods, and decorations catering to dozens of different ethnic traditions, further commercializing the diversity. This process was one of selective assimilation. Immigrants often shed their native language and political affiliations quickly, but they clung tenaciously to their deeply personal, home-based food and holiday traditions. These customs became vital tools for maintaining ethnic identity in a new land. The legacy of the American melting pot is that Christmas is now truly a globalized holiday. It is a syncretic blend where the ancient German evergreen stands next to the Italian presepio, and the Dutch Santa delivers toys that fund global commerce. This continuous integration of global traditions ensures that the American Christmas is not a static historical relic, but a constantly evolving reflection of the nation's diverse populace and shared aspirations for light, community, and generosity. The Christmas Special, media's role in shaping shared holiday narratives. The Victorian era reinvented Christmas, but the 20th century media machine made it universal. Beginning with radio, exploding with cinema, and cemented by television, mass media became the single most effective tool for imposing a unified, national, and eventually global narrative onto the once fragmented American holiday. The Christmas Special became a cultural liturgy, an annual ritual that taught generations of Americans, regardless of their background, region, or denomination, what Christmas looked like, sounded like, and felt like. This pervasive media presence transformed the sentimental Victorian ideal into a powerful, profitable, and enduring mythology, creating a shared cultural memory that transcended real-world diversity. In the early 20th century, the burgeoning film and radio industries seized upon the commercialized, sentimental Christmas model as ideal programming material. These mediums worked to solidify the core narrative established by Dickens and Moore. 1. The sound of Christmas. Radio was crucial in defining the sound of the American Christmas. the development of popular non-liturgical holiday music, songs like White Christmas, 1942, and The Christmas Song, 1946, created a powerful emotional soundtrack. These songs, largely secular in theme, snow, warmth, nostalgia, were played nationwide, instantly bridging regional and ethnic divides. The shared experience of hearing Bing Crosby sing of a snowy, idealized past created a powerful sense of national unity and seasonal expectation regardless of the listener's actual weather or background. The film narrative, the 1940s, cinema provided the first widely shared visual canon. Films of the 1940s established the primary plot lines of the holiday narrative: the cynical adult redeemed by a child's faith, the miracle of belief, and the necessity of generosity. Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, was particularly groundbreaking. It argued for the secular power of belief itself, using the courtroom to legally affirm Santa Claus and, by extension, the entire commercialized fantasy. This movie served as a cultural permission slip for sophisticated modern adults to embrace the seasonal mythology. Through radio and film, the chaotic historical Christmas was systematically replaced by a unified vision of snowy perfection, heartwarming generosity, and the absolute reality of Santa Claus.
The launch of network television in the 1950s provided the media platform that definitively standardized the American Christmas narrative. The Christmas special became a mandatory annual event, establishing a cultural canon of stories that became instantly recognizable rites of passage for every generation. The Claymation Legacy, Rankin and Bass. The series of stop-motion animated specials produced by Rankin and Bass, beginning with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1964, are arguably the single greatest force in homogenizing the Santa mythology. These specials didn't just tell stories, they expanded the mythology of Santa's world, creating the elves, the misfit toys, and the North Pole's geography. They taught children the core lessons of the era: tolerance, accepting Rudolph, self-acceptance, the misfit toys, and the necessity of teamwork to make Christmas work. These specials provided the definitive visual and emotional interpretation of Moore's poem. A Charlie Brown Christmas, 1965. This special was revolutionary because it offered a necessary counter-narrative to the commercialism that media itself was fueling. Charlie Brown's lament, "I think there must be something wrong with me, Linus. Christmas is coming, but I'm not happy," was a direct critique of the season's materialism. Linus's reading of the Gospel of Luke and the triumph of the pathetic little tree over the aluminum commercial tree provided the media age equivalent of Dickens's moralizing. It ensured that the secular narrative retained a space for profound reflection, giving the holiday a perpetual mechanism for self-critique and moral redemption. These specials became annual traditions, consumed simultaneously by millions, creating a shared reference library of holiday sentiment and moral lessons that bound the nation together far more effectively than any religious doctrine or historical memory. The relationship between media and commercialism was symbiotic, creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop. 1. Advertising's calendar. Media dictated the timing of the shopping season. The moment the first classic special aired, the consumer knew the season had officially begun. Advertisers used the emotional capital built by the specials, the warmth, the nostalgia, the family love, to sell products, linking manufactured sentiment directly to consumption. The Coca-Cola Santa. The media landscape facilitated the absolute standardization of Santa. The Coca-Cola Santa, perfected by artist Haddon Sundblom, was ubiquitous in magazines, on billboards, and eventually on television. This single, friendly, slightly portly figure became the global commercial trademark for the entire holiday, erasing lingering regional differences in the gift-bringer's appearance. The narrative of gift-giving. Media consistently reinforced the idea that gifts equal love. Narrative arcs in countless movies and TV shows revolved around finding the perfect gift or the lack thereof, cementing the moral imperative of shopping into the American psyche.
In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the rise of cable, streaming services, and digital media has both fragmented and intensified the Christmas special phenomenon. 1. Nostalgia as a commodity. The original classics, Rudolph, A Charlie Brown Christmas, are now viewed as sentimental relics, generating massive nostalgia revenue. Their consistent re-airing serves to connect millennials and Gen Z to the shared cultural memory established by their Boomer and Gen X parents. 2. The perpetual Christmas channel. The creation of 24/7 holiday programming, such as those offered by cable networks, ensures that Christmas is no longer confined to the 12 days or even December, but can now begin as early as October. This hypersaturation transforms the season from an annual event into an extended, prolonged cultural environment. 3. The new narrative template. Modern Christmas movies, particularly those produced for streaming, have created a new, specific narrative template. A charming, career-focused protagonist who returns to a small town, finds love, and is forced to confront the true meaning of the holiday, often symbolized by a quirky, old-fashioned local custom or a lost family tradition. This template consistently reinforces the core values of the media Christmas: domestication, sentimentality, and the rejection of modern complexity. The final role of media was to transform the American Christmas model into a global export. Through the worldwide distribution of Hollywood films, American television shows, and global advertising campaigns led by companies like Coca-Cola, the specific, once regional American traditions became universal. The German Christmas tree and the Dutch-American Santa Claus are now recognized and celebrated in countries with no historical connection to either Germanic or Dutch culture. The emotional tropes, the snowy landscape, even in tropical countries, the emphasis on consumer goods, and the focus on the child's belief have been adopted in cultures from Japan to Brazil, testifying to the overwhelming power of the media to create a universally recognizable and commercially successful holiday narrative. The Christmas special, in all its forms, has therefore served as the final, powerful filter in the holiday's long history. It took the scattered traditions of pagan roots, Catholic dogma, and Puritan austerity, stripped them of their conflict, and presented them as a seamless, aesthetically perfect, and morally uplifting story that taught every American precisely what their Christmas should be. Beyond the trees, the American debate over the war on Christmas. The modern American Christmas, a synthesis of pagan ritual, Christian doctrine, Victorian sentiment, and aggressive commercialism, appears on the surface to be the single most cohesive and universally accepted cultural event of the year. Yet, beneath the veneer of manufactured unity and glittering holiday lights, the holiday remains what it has always been, a battleground. The contemporary war on Christmas debate, which dominates American public discourse every winter, is not a new conflict. It is merely the latest, most visible manifestation of the holiday's 2,000-year history of cultural struggle, linguistic co-optation, and anxiety over the true meaning of the season. This debate highlights the core tension that has defined Christmas since its inception: the struggle between the sacred and the secular, and the anxiety over whose traditions get to define the American public square. The war on Christmas rhetoric, popularized heavily in the early 21st century, posits that secular forces, political correctness, and non-Christian groups are actively attempting to erase the Christian identity of the holiday. While the debate is framed in modern political terms, its emotional roots are deeply historical. 1. The Puritan echo. The fundamental anxiety that the holy day is being corrupted by profane elements is a direct echo of the Puritan backlash of the 17th century. Just as the Puritans condemned the Lord of Misrule for subverting doctrine, modern critics condemn the replacement of Merry Christmas with Happy Holidays as an act of subversive secularism. It is the fear of cultural dilution reasserting itself. 2. The sacred versus secular battle. The debate focuses almost entirely on the symbolic intersection of the public and private spheres. Whether a cashier should say Merry Christmas, whether a public school can sing a religious carol, and whether Christmas trees on public property should be called holiday trees. These symbols are the very
The launch of network television in the 1950s provided the media platform that definitively standardized the American Christmas narrative. The Christmas special became a mandatory annual event, establishing a cultural canon of stories that became instantly recognizable rites of passage for every generation. 1. The Claymation Legacy, Rankin Bass. The series of stop-motion animated specials produced by Rankin & Bass, beginning with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1964, are arguably the single greatest force in homogenizing the Santa mythology. These specials didn't just tell stories, they expanded the mythology of Santa's world, creating the elves, the misfit toys, and the North Pole's geography. They taught children the core lessons of the era: tolerance, accepting Rudolph, self-acceptance, the misfit toys, and the necessity of teamwork to make Christmas work. These specials provided the definitive visual and emotional interpretation of Moore's poem. 2. A Charlie Brown Christmas, 1965. This special was revolutionary because it offered a necessary counter-narrative to the commercialism that media itself was fueling. Charlie Brown's lament, "I think there must be something wrong with me, Linus. Christmas is coming, but I'm not happy," was a direct critique of the season's materialism. Linus's reading of the Gospel of Luke and the triumph of the pathetic little tree over the aluminum commercial tree provided the media age equivalent of Dickens' moralizing. It ensured that the secular narrative retained a space for profound reflection, giving the holiday a perpetual mechanism for self-critique and moral redemption. These specials became annual traditions, consumed simultaneously by millions, creating a shared reference library of holiday sentiment and moral lessons that bound the nation together far more effectively than any religious doctrine or historical memory. The relationship between media and commercialism was symbiotic, creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop. 1. Advertising's calendar. Media dictated the timing of the shopping season. The moment the first classic special aired, the consumer knew the season had officially begun. Advertisers used the emotional capital built by the specials, the warmth, the nostalgia, the family love, to sell products, linking manufactured sentiment directly to consumption. 2. The Coca-Cola Santa. The media landscape facilitated the absolute standardization of Santa. The Coca-Cola Santa, perfected by artist Haddon Sundblom, was ubiquitous in magazines, on billboards, and eventually on television. This single, friendly, slightly portly figure became the global commercial trademark for the entire holiday, erasing lingering regional differences in the gift-bringer's appearance. 3. The narrative of gift-giving. Media consistently reinforced the idea that gifts equal love. Narrative arcs in countless movies and TV shows revolved around finding the perfect gift or the lack thereof, cementing the moral imperative of shopping into the American psyche. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the rise of cable, streaming services, and digital media has both fragmented and intensified the Christmas special phenomenon. 1. Nostalgia as a commodity. The original classics, Rudolph, A Charlie Brown Christmas, are now viewed as sentimental relics, generating massive nostalgia revenue. Their consistent re-airing serves to connect millennials and Gen Z to the shared cultural memory established by their Boomer and Gen X parents. 2. The perpetual Christmas channel. The creation of 24/7 holiday programming, such as those offered by cable networks, ensures that Christmas is no longer confined to the 12 days or even December, but can now begin as early as October. This hypersaturation transforms the season into an annual event into an extended, prolonged cultural environment. 3. The new narrative template. Modern Christmas movies, particularly those produced for streaming, have created a new specific narrative template. A charming, career-focused protagonist who returns to a small town, finds love, and is forced to confront the true meaning of the holiday, often symbolized by a quirky, old-fashioned local custom or a lost family tradition. This template consistently reinforces the core values of the media Christmas: domestication, sentimentality, and the rejection of modern complexity. The final role of media was to transform the American Christmas model into a global export. Through the worldwide distribution of Hollywood films, American television shows, and global advertising campaigns, led by companies like Coca-Cola, the specific, once regional American traditions became universal. The German Christmas tree and the Dutch-American Santa Claus are now recognized and celebrated in countries with no historical connection to either Germanic or Dutch culture. The emotional tropes, the snowy landscape, even in tropical countries, the emphasis on consumer goods, and the focus on the child's belief have been adopted in cultures from Japan to Brazil, testifying to the overwhelming power of the media to create a universally recognizable, commercially successful holiday narrative. The Christmas special, in all its forms, has therefore served as the final, powerful filter in the holiday's long history. It took the scattered traditions of pagan roots, Catholic dogma, and Puritan austerity, stripped them of their conflict, and presented them as a seamless, aesthetically perfect, and morally uplifting story that taught every American precisely what their Christmas should be. Beyond the trees, the American debate over the war on Christmas. The modern American Christmas, a synthesis of pagan ritual, Christian doctrine, Victorian sentiment, and aggressive commercialism, appears on the surface to be the single most cohesive and universally accepted cultural event of the year. Yet, beneath the veneer of manufactured unity and glittering holiday lights, the holiday remains what it has always been, a battleground. The contemporary War on Christmas debate, which dominates American public discourse every winter, is not a new conflict. It is merely the latest, most visible manifestation of the holiday's 2,000-year history of cultural struggle, linguistic co-optation, and anxiety over the true meaning of the season. This debate highlights the core tension that has defined Christmas since its inception: the struggle between the sacred and the secular, and the anxiety over whose traditions get to define the American public square. The war on Christmas rhetoric, popularized heavily in the early 21st century, posits that secular forces, political correctness, and non-Christian groups are actively attempting to erase the Christian identity of the holiday. While the debate is framed in modern political terms, its emotional roots are deeply historical. 1. The Puritan echo. The fundamental anxiety that the holy day is being corrupted by profane elements is a direct echo of the Puritan backlash of the 17th century. Just as the Puritans condemned the Lord of Misrule for subverting doctrine, modern critics condemn the replacement of Merry Christmas with Happy Holidays as an act of subversive secularism. It is the fear of cultural dilution reasserting itself. The secular versus sacred battle, the debate focuses almost entirely on the symbolic intersection of the public and private spheres. Whether a cashier should say Merry Christmas, whether a public school can sing a religious carol, and whether Christmas trees on public property should be called holiday trees. These symbols are
The enduring power of the Christmas spirit. The history of Christmas is a breathtaking saga of survival through assimilation. It is a story not of a single event or a rigid doctrine, but of a persistent human impulse that refused to be extinguished by empires, schisms, or ideological Puritans. From the dark uncertainty of the winter solstice to the brilliant glow of commercial LED displays, the modern holiday stands as a towering cultural monument, a repository of humanity's oldest fears, its greatest hopes, and its most complex contradictions. The final act of this epic history is to recognize that the Christmas spirit,
often sentimentalized and commercialized, is in fact the distilled essence of 2 millennia of strategic adaptation, cultural blending, and a fierce, enduring demand for light and connection during the darkest time of the year. The American Christmas of the 21st century is a masterful work of cultural syncretism, a seamless fusion of elements that are, in historical reality, diametrically opposed. This fusion is the holiday's source of both its universal appeal and its eternal friction. 1. Pagan core. The timing, December 25th, the greenery, holly, ivy, and fir, the fire, lights, candles, and the need for feasting are all direct inheritances from Yule and Saturnalia, ancient rites of survival and solar encouragement. 2. Christian frame. The official narrative, the liturgical calendar, Advent, the 12 days, Epiphany, and the core emphasis on charity, forgiveness, and hope derive from the Christian nativity. 3. Secular structure. The moral message, generosity, family togetherness, and the central figure, Santa Claus, were entirely invented by Victorian literature to quell social unrest and promote middle-class values. 4. Commercial engine. The logistical execution, the shopping season, mass-produced gifts, is dictated entirely by 20th century capitalist forces. The genius of the holiday is that no one element requires the full assent to the others. One can celebrate the secular Santa without adhering to Christian doctrine. One can observe the liturgical vigil without engaging in commercial spending. This structural flexibility is the greatest lesson learned from the Church's early strategic co-option. To survive, the holiday must be accessible to all human needs, not just one theological truth. At its deepest, most primal level, the Christmas spirit remains rooted in the ancient fear of the solstice. In a world saturated with electric light, few modern Americans fear the literal disappearance of the sun, but the psychological need for defiance against darkness persists. The liturgy of lights, the ubiquitous use of Christmas lights, the millions of strands decorating homes, public squares, and trees, is the modern, technological successor to the single Yule log and the exchanged Roman ciri. These lights are a communal, public declaration that the community is resisting gloom, cold, and uncertainty. The greater the darkness, the more imperative the display of light becomes, affirming the ancient ritual of encouraging the solar rebirth. The pause and the reset. The 12 days and the entire holiday season serve as an indispensable temporal pause in the hyper-accelerated pace of modern life. Just as the feasting provided rest from the grinding labor of the medieval fields, the modern holiday provides a mandated, collective break from the relentless demands of the digital global economy. It is a time for the social clock to stop, forcing people back toward the intimacy of the domestic sphere and the reaffirmation of family bonds. This need for an annual reset button is the powerful, sustaining engine of the holiday. The media-driven standardization of the Christmas narrative has created a profound and pervasive cultural glue. In a nation as vast and diverse as the United States, Christmas is one of the few experiences that nearly every citizen shares regardless of background. Shared mythology. Whether raised Catholic, Jewish, or non-religious, every American knows the story of Santa Claus, the existence of Rudolph, and the moral lesson of A Christmas Carol. This shared cultural literacy fosters a sense of national belonging and generational continuity. When an immigrant child first encounters the American Christmas, they are immediately given access to a coherent mythology that aids assimilation. Nostalgia as virtue. The emotional engine of the modern holiday is nostalgia. The sentimentality of Christmas relies on the collective yearning for an idealized past, often constructed from Dickens's London or Norman Rockwell's New England. This nostalgia is a comforting mechanism, providing emotional stability in a rapidly changing world. By focusing on the memory of past Christmases, the holiday reinforces the stability and permanence of the family unit, making it a critical antidote to the uncertainty of modern life. The enduring power of the Christmas spirit lies in its ability to simultaneously embrace and reconcile its deepest contradictions. 1. Charity and consumption. The holiday manages to hold the virtue of Christian charity, caring for the poor, giving alms, in tension with the demands of rampant consumerism. The act of buying a gift, which is purely economic, is reinterpreted as a virtuous act of love. The economy benefits from the expenditure, and the conscience is soothed by the philanthropic intention. This reconciliation is the masterstroke of the American Christmas. 2. Chaos and control. The modern holiday maintains the tension between chaos and control. While the Lord of Misrule is banished, the underlying impulse for license survives in the excesses of the office party, the gluttony of the feast, and the brief suspension of normal rules. This temporary, contained chaos is necessary for the smooth functioning of society the rest of the year, confirming the ancient wisdom of Saturnalia. The sacred and the secular. The War on Christmas debate confirms that the holiday's sacred identity is constantly being tested and redefined by its secular popularity. This constant testing ensures the holiday remains relevant. It prevents it from becoming a purely theological ritual and forces it to continue to address the anxieties of the contemporary world. The real history of Christmas is far messier, darker, and more chaotic than the sentimental pictures on modern Christmas cards suggest. It is the history of ancient magic, desperate survival, political maneuvering, religious conflict, and profound commercial genius. Yet from this turbulent history, a simple, powerful, and persistent message has emerged, that hope is non-negotiable. The enduring Christmas spirit is the collective, powerful human affirmation that even when the days are shortest, the future is uncertain, and the world is cold, there will always be a moment for light, for feasting, for generosity, and for the necessary belief in the renewal of life. The lights blinking on the suburban American home today are not merely decorations. They are the direct descendants of the Yule log, the Roman Syri, and the Jewish menorah, a universal, ancient language spoken by every culture that has ever faced the dark. The enduring power of Christmas is the testament to the human spirit's refusal to surrender to the night, making it the world's most successful, most adaptable, and most profoundly human holiday.